Okay. I think I might be streaming. This is weird. It's not going to officially start until 2, though. Let's see here. What we got going here? Okay. I would appreciate it if someone would type something in the chat just so I'll know that something's going on. So far, nothing. Oh, okay. Maitreya Buddha has greeted me, so that's a good sign. All right. This is a little tricky. Okay. Let's see. I won't start answering questions until 2. In fact, I won't even greet anybody till 2. Just sip on my beverage. Hot coffee on a hot day may be a bad idea. Okay. Maitreya Buddha says, will you be answering questions from the comments of your last uploaded video? Yeah. This is like my 3rd live stream that I've ever done. So I'm still not used to it yet. But as a general rule, I'll be answering questions from submitted questions over the past week. And then every once in a while, I'll be looking at the chat and seeing if there's any more questions in the chat. Is what I plan on doing. But I guess before the show officially starts, I should put the paper umbrella back into the coffee, just so people don't think that I'm an uncultured barbarian. Okay. It says 1:59. Better an hour early than a minute late and all that, but I'm just going to wait until 2, because that's what I said I was going to do. We're going to start this at 2 p.m. Those of you who aren't watching this live, you don't have to worry about any of this. You don't have to adjust your settings, anything like that. But this is the question and answer episode 200 live stream. I think the last live stream was at 100, which seems like it was only like 8 months ago, but it had to have been longer than 8 months ago. Okay, 20 seconds. The excitement is almost unbearable. 10 seconds. There should be like that thing, like you clap it at the beginning of filming or something. Okay, action. Hello and welcome to question and answer episode number 200, live stream edition. I'm your host, pannobhasa. This is your co-host, my beverage. And as I've already said, it may be a mistake to drink hot coffee on a hot day in South Carolina, but what the hell? No gut, no glory. And I guess the way I'm going to have to do this is after I'm finished, then I can go in and edit, put in a thumbnail, put in the list of questions and all that. And also download this video so that I can then upload it onto other platforms, including, pretty much all of the other platforms are less censorious, but we don't have to get into that. So let's see, any updates? Well, last week I mentioned that my gold ring Danios were starting to die, which, like 3 or 4 of them died. I still have like a little school of like 5 of them in my aquarium. And then like 3 days ago, I start noticing little baby Danios. So whether the die-off and like they're like mating and reproducing has something to do with it, I don't know. A lot of animals have it way worse than people do, where you have sex once and then you just die, like a salmon. But fortunately, I don't have salmon in my aquarium. So I guess what I should do, Proto-Pseudo-Monk. Holy cow, this is his prize. So I guess he's become a Hindu, if he's worshiping cows now. Okay, so I guess I should start answering questions, because that's what I'm here for, right? Know what I'm saying? First question is from the Saboteur. And the Saboteur watches me on BitChute, so he's not going to be able to avail himself of the luxury of seeing this on YouTube. Live. Although I think it's not 100% live because there's like a delay, I've noticed. So who knows? Who knows what the delay is for? Maybe it's just, it takes that long for the electricity to go through all the little wires and stuff. Okay, first question is from the Saboteur. And the Saboteur says, in Q&A 199, you stated that regret is bad karma, but surely regret is also a sign of spiritual maturity. Or should we not feel sorry for harming other beings? Okay, well, I mean, I've said it more than once. I said it, I mean, it's something that I harp away at times. And I gotta keep an eye on the chat here. Okay. Yeah, I am taking questions from the chat. Although mainly I'm going to be answering the questions that were submitted over the past week. And then every once in a while, I'll be looking at the chat and answering questions from that too. At least that is the plan. But everything is impermanent, subject to change. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I have said, I remember years ago, not too many years ago, like maybe 7 years ago, I was living in California and teaching the children of Burmese immigrant Buddhists about Buddhism. And I would tell them, I was like, if you only know one thing about Buddhism, the most important thing you should know is that desire is the cause of all suffering. Second noble truth. But if there's another thing that you know about Buddhism, that's all you know. The second most important thing to know is that a guilty conscience, remorse, regret, always more bad than good. You make bad karma. It is an unskillful, unwholesome mental state to feel guilty, like have a guilty conscience, have remorse of conscience. Again, bite of inwit, for those of you who have read a lot of James Joyce. So, regret is not really a sign of spiritual maturity. It's a sign, I mean, it's a sign that you have some kind of spiritual awareness, maybe. It's a sign that at least you are capable of acknowledging when you've done something wrong. But just because people feel this stuff doesn't mean that it's good. I mean, like, all the emotions that people have some sort of survival value. That's why we have it evolved into our ancestors, you know, like greed. You have greed, you're more likely to survive in times of like scarcity, that kind of thing. Or lust, you know, you have lust, you're more likely to reproduce your DNA sequences and not become an evolutionary dead end, all that kind of stuff. So maybe regret has some kind of survival value for cave people. But once you get into a higher level of spiritual maturity, then you don't need the greed to get what you need. You don't need regret to get you to stop doing bad things. You can just acknowledge that you did something wrong. You can resolve to try harder in future not to do it again. It doesn't require any regret or remorse whatsoever to acknowledge you did something wrong and to resolve to do better in future. The regret is like friction against the way things are. It's like desiring that the past had been different. And no amount of desiring the past had been different is going to cause the past to be different. I mean, the past is behind us. It's already been done. Just the best you can do if you fall down is just get back up and continue moving forwards and be more careful not to trip next time. So, there's this question here. Should we not feel sorry for harming other beings? You can feel compassion, which is kind of like feeling sorry in a way, but wishing that you hadn't done it is pointless. It is just a pointless, futile generation of dukkha. It just makes things worse. So again, you harm some other being accidentally or even on purpose, and then you realize, well, it would have been better if I hadn't done that. And so you can do what you can to make amends if that is possible, and you can resolve to try to do better in future. In fact, something resembling confession in Theravada Buddhism exists, where you can confess a fault or a misdeed to some respected spiritual person for the sake of helping you to do better in future. Just, I acknowledge I did this wrong. I did this act. I acknowledge that it is wrong. And I'm telling you to help me to do better next time. That's all fine. It can all have positive mental states. But like any kind of negative mental state is going to be essentially bad karma, including remorse over having, blown up that busload of nuns and orphans. So, yeah, I mean, regret is not necessarily a sign of spiritual maturity, but at least it indicates an awareness of a knowledge of right and wrong. But then again, it's like the knowledge of right and wrong was what caused Adam and Eve to fall from grace and get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? So a sign of spiritual maturity is not struggling against the way things are, just accepting the way things are, including accepting the fact that 3 weeks ago you did something that caused a lot of suffering, and you acknowledge that and you resolve to do better in future. And I need to keep an eye on, let's see, maybe I'm going to have to rearrange things a little bit just so I can see the chat. Okay. So we got a few people here. Let's see. Question 1 from Proto-Pseudo-Monk. Are you taking questions from the chat? I won't count that as a question. Okay. Fred, does karma have memory? That's kind of a weird question. Does karma have memory? I mean, it has momentum, and momentum is a kind of memory. It's like a pool ball rolling across the pool table. In a way, because it has momentum, that's a kind of memory of it getting hit by the pool cue or by another ball to start it moving. It's a momentum. I guess using Newtonian language, an object in motion tends to remain in motion unless acted upon by some other force. So that's kind of the way karma works. So it's sort of a kind of memory because it's momentum. It's in a way, it sort of remembers the motive force that got it going because it's still going. But you wouldn't say that it's like a conscious memory in the sense of remembering who your first grade teacher was, anything like that. So let's see here. Oh, Proto-Pseudo-Monk's asking questions. Okay. He says, Q1, question number 1. Should I finish my master's degree or become a monk now? I cannot endure 6 months more of this insanity. My mind seeks the unshakable peace of Nibbana. Well, I mean, if you cannot endure 6 more months of this insanity, that pretty much answers your own question. Maybe you're just sort of two minds on whether you ought to endure 6 more months of that insanity, which is why you ask the questions. This question in particular. I'm not even sure what the master's degree is in. I remember there was an American monk who came to Burma, ordained in the same tradition as me. And he sought me out because I was kind of legendary in the Tampulu tradition, the strict monk who, is roughing it in caves and all that. So he sought me out in Burma. It was like Christmas Day, and I had malaria really bad. That was the first time I had malaria. And I was hospitalized. I mean, that's almost immediately upon him coming to see me. They just had to load me into the Jeep and take me into town to a hospital. But the thing is, he eventually dropped out of the monkhood, and it was just like this kind of explosion. It was just some sort of, he was under such stress that it built up to the point where he just like catapulted himself very spectacularly out of the Sangha. And he was write me letters occasionally. And he was saying that he still was he fully intended to renounce the world again and to strive for Nibbana in this very life. But first, he wanted to get a degree in Buddhist studies from Oxford University in England under Richard Gombrich. Richard Gombrich was going to be his mentor. And I kept telling him, if you really want to become enlightened in this life, then you're better off going to a meditation master in a forest somewhere than going to Richard Gombrich, who isn't even a Buddhist, in Oxford. But, I mean, he just didn't see it that way. But eventually he did. I think he ran out of money and couldn't afford to keep going to Oxford. And he did reordain. I think he's in robes right now. Last I heard, he was in robes right now. So, I mean, if you're just getting a degree that's not even going to really be helping you. I mean, if you fully intend to renounce the world and strive for enlightenment, at the very least, if you get a degree, it should at least be kind of helping you in that direction. I mean, if you're just getting a degree in accounting or, I don't know, like finance, that kind of stuff, it's not going to be of any help at all after you renounce the world, probably. I mean, you can pick up certain things. Certain, like my degree in biology actually has helped me as a monk or as a Buddhist. It's just helping to understand why beings behave the way they do. It's very helpful. Of course, sometimes my degree in biology would be kind of sidetracking me a little bit. I did a lot of really fascinating studies of like the evolution of hymenopteran insects, like ants, bees, and wasps. Because in the tropics, you have more diversity of hymenopteran insects. And so you can just see like the most primitive wasps that just kind of lay an egg on a caterpillar and fly away. And then you got a little bit more advanced ones that insert the egg into the caterpillar. And then you got more advanced ones that paralyze the caterpillar and bury it underground. And then you've got the more advanced ones that are making like these elaborate nests, like the potter wasps, and then they're like camouflaging it because there's other species of wasps that are parasitic and will burrow in and steal what's inside. And so it's just seeing the sort of the gradation of like the really primitive ones up to like the very relatively complex social wasps that have like a group, like a like a hive kind of a thing. I mean, that was fascinating. It didn't necessarily help me as a monk. But I mean, like a degree in medicine or something, I mean, that could be helpful. Like administering first aid in some remote jungle area, it could be helpful. Knowing how to stay healthy, for example. So let's see. Should I finish my master's degree or become a monk now? Well, I mean, I don't know all the details. I mean, if you really are firmly persuaded you're going to be a monk and renounce the world, then I guess an academic degree isn't really necessary. I mean, it's not even necessary for monks to have monastic degrees. You want to come to Burma and strive to become an Ega Mahapandita or something, some ecclesiastical title like bestowed upon you by the government. Even that doesn't really help. In fact, in Burma, certain titled monks like Dhammasariyas, which is sort of like at least a bachelor's degree in Buddhistic studies in Burma, like in the monastic university system. Dhammasariya is like one of the first big titles you can get. And they have a reputation for just like wanting to be famous and just being famous as Dhamma teachers and not really practicing all that much, not following the rules of monastic discipline, that sort of thing. And Ajahn Chah had this famous saying that people who start off like intellectually studying Dhamma, he's mainly referring to scholar monks, usually don't get very far in Dhamma just because they're like intellectualizing everything instead of just living the life spontaneously. So, I mean, with regard to whether you should finish your master's degree or not, I mean, that's up to you. Let's see, he's got a Master of Science in Artificial Intelligence. Well, I mean, that could theoretically be helpful in understanding, like, natural intelligence. But, I mean, if you really are fully intended on just renouncing the world, I mean, consider the example of Bahia in the Bahia Sutta, one of my favorite suttas, where as soon as he realizes he's not enlightened, but there is a being who is called enlightened, hundreds of miles away, he just immediately just packs up and just takes off. I mean, he doesn't want to waste any time. When he finally gets to Savatthi, or wherever it was that the Buddha was at the time, he asks, "Where's the Buddha? I need to talk to him." And they say, "Well, he's going for alms in town right now. He'll be back in a little while. You just make yourself comfortable, wait here." And he just won't have it. And so I got to talk to him as soon as possible. I don't know when I'm going to die. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, how much time I've got to learn this essential Dhamma. So he goes into town. He hunts down the Buddha going for alms. He asks the Buddha in the street, "Teach me Dhamma." And the Buddha says, "Now is not an appropriate time. It's not convenient. I'm walking for alms right now." And then Bahia just insists, saying, "I don't know how much time I've got in this world. I need it now." So finally, the Buddha teaches him Dhamma. Bahia becomes enlightened upon hearing this really concentrated Dhamma talk that lasts only a few seconds. And then shortly after that, he gets trampled by a cow. And so he did right in that case, I guess, in not wanting to postpone learning Dhamma any more than necessary. And I guess since there's people submitting stuff in the chat, that means that this is actually working. We're actually live right now. We're close to live. Slight delay of a few seconds. So let's see here. Terzaskas he's struggling to spell his name correctly there. Let's see. Answer that question. Let's see. Okay. Is monogamy more virtuous than open relationships or polyamory for a Buddhist layperson? Berber meditator. Man. Okay. Yeah, monogamy is, if celibacy is best from a strictly Theravada Buddhist point of view. If you can't be celibate, then there's a famous saying in the text where the Buddha says, if you can renounce the world and live the holy life, by all means do so. If you can't renounce the world and live the holy life, then at the very least, you should avoid sexual intercourse as though avoiding falling into a deep pit with glowing coals at the bottom. But if even that is too much, at the very, very least, stay away from the wives of other men. So there is that. But I do think that monogamy, it reduces the number of digressions from celibacy down to one other person. So yeah, I think it's fairly common sense that monogamy would be considered more virtuous than open relationships or polyamory. Although in the Buddhist time, polygamy was socially acceptable, legal, and all that. Kings had harems at the time. The Buddha himself, before he renounced the world, apparently had a harem of beautiful dancing girls and all that. But he wasn't committing adultery in the sense of all of his slave girls were his property, that kind of thing. I think he did only have one wife according to tradition. And maybe he was just virtuous even before he renounced the world and just kind of watched the beautiful dancing girls dancing and didn't lay a hand on them. But that would be abnormal, I think. But the Buddha was an abnormal person in certain ways, certain very good, valuable ways. Okay. So, yeah, with regard to that question, is monogamy more virtuous than open relationships or polyamory? Yeah. monogamy would be more virtuous than open relationships, especially if you're messing around with the wives of other men, even if the other man is sort of a cuck sitting in the cuck chair wanting to watch or whatever. Still, it's sexual misconduct. And also, like, promiscuous sex is also kamesu michacharam. Okay. So, and just going with reality, open relationships and polyamory tend to be unstable and tend not to last very long. You know, it's just sort of an explosion waiting to happen. So let's see here. Man, I'm just going to the chat and answering questions, and we'll eventually get to the usual list. Maybe I should get back to the saboteur and answer his second question before I do any more from the chat. So the saboteur says, some criminals in prison have stated they don't care what they've done. Does that make them closer to being Buddhist? Not necessarily. It just makes them closer to being sociopaths, I guess. Let's see, I gotta do this. See, I've got a monkey with my, what am I doing here? I've got different windows, and I'm trying to figure this out. Huh. All right, I think I'm getting it. Okay, yeah, see, I've got like 3 different windows. I've got like the OSB, is that what it's called? Yeah, OBS. I got the OBS, I've got YouTube, and then I've got the list that has the usual questions on it. And then I can't see all 3 at the same time, so I've got to like juggle around a lot. Okay, so let's get back to the saboteur's second question. Some criminals in prison have stated they don't care what they've done. Does that make them closer to being Buddhist? Maybe a few of them. I mean, in certain ways, maybe, where they're not clinging to remorse. You know, so I mean, that would be good from a Buddhist point of view. But for the most part, being a sociopath is taking you farther away from Buddhism than closer to Buddhism, because, I mean, in Buddhism, you should have moral scruples. You should have a conscience. It's just that the conscience should take effect before you do the misdeed and prevent you from doing it. Once, I mean, that hasn't happened. You know, the fail-safe of moral scruples hasn't successfully operated, and you just go ahead and do the misdeed, then having like retroactive remorse or scruples of conscience, it doesn't help anything. It just makes things worse overall. So these criminals in prison that, I mean, they don't feel remorse, and they didn't feel any kind of moral scruples before they were doing the deed. They wanted to do it. Then, I mean, they're just sociopaths, or a lot of them are. You know, they're just kind of so closed off that they're insensitive to other beings. You know, their heart chakra isn't open, going with yogic new age kind of language. You know, they're just closed off. They're just completely encased in this shell of like Pink Floyd's Wall. And that's why they don't feel any kind of remorse, because they're just completely like self-referential, and they don't even have a window in Pink Floyd's Wall that allows them to kind of feel in to what other beings are feeling. They just feel their own feelings. They don't give a shit about what anyone else is feeling. They're not even exposed to it, really. Or, you know, it has no effect on them other than maybe they get a rush from somebody like screaming or whatever. So, yeah, it's just because they don't feel remorse. You know, they might not feel fear either, like some sociopathic tough guy who just loves fighting and getting into trouble. He might be courageous also, but that doesn't mean, I mean, just courage in itself can be considered a kind of virtue. Lack of remorse, from a Buddhist point anyway, can be seen as a kind of virtue, but that doesn't mean that overall they're closer to the Buddhist ideal. So, I'll look at the chat again. Oh my. Okay. Let's see. Question. Could you try, and this is Maximin. Maximin asks, could you try and explain the process of beaming metta from your own experience? Beaming metta. Well, I was never really into metta meditation. I've done it. Like a lot of times, let's see, how should I rephrase? I've never really made like a central practice of metta meditation. It didn't really work for me. Metta has to be spontaneous in my case. But like if you're an ordained Buddhist monk at a lot of monasteries, you're just taught, like before you go for alms round, it's like Sundaga ma apanko sitnapya janma chana jabaze, where you kind of chant this blessing to the people of the village, just may they all be well and happy, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I could do that. That's no problem. And, a lot of the time you just genuinely feel it. It's not just blah, blah, blah coming out your mouth. But beaming metta, gosh, it's not really like you're shooting metta like from a ray gun. It's mainly you're like focusing your attention on a certain being or a certain like category of beings, all males, all females, all beings in higher realms, all beings in lower realms, this kind of thing. Or, sending metta in the northern direction, the southern direction, the east and the west, up and down, intermediate directions. There's all this kind of formula, cookbook kind of instructions for sending metta that you can find in the texts. I really didn't do that a whole lot other than, like morning chanting at a monastery where, that's just part of the, the schedule. What is it? The program, part of the program. So I would do that. But if you are genuinely sending metta to somebody, there is something going on. At least it can really be going on. I remember one time my preceptor didn't like me very much, mainly because he was very Burmese and I was not particularly Burmese at all. And I was seen as kind of a loose cannon. Every once in a while, he liked me because I was like conservative in my practice. And, it's like, I remember one time U Pandita came to the monastery. Mahasi U Pandita, the famous Mahasi U Pandita, came to the monastery, and almost every monk at the monastery, except me, went to the Seattle and asked for permission to go and study Mahasi method meditation, and I didn't. And so he praised me at that time because I was like the only monk at the monastery that didn't want to go off and start practicing Mahasi method. But as a general rule, he didn't like me. And then one day, I remember I was walking around outside and I just felt like this glow in my heart. I just felt really good for some reason. And I found out that in the shrine room of the main monastery building, at that exact time, my Sayadaw was leading a metta meditation like instruction to a group of people there, and he was sending metta apparently, and I caught some of it. So it was like I could really feel it happening when it was happening. And there are lots of cases of, for example, there's a Burmese monk named Odamasara or Odamathara, I can't remember which it was, Odamasara, I think, who taught this metta meditation technique. And there was this woman that was having trouble with her boss that started following the technique. And shortly after she was sending metta to this troublemaker boss, he just came to her and just sincerely apologized and asked her forgiveness. And it could just be a coincidence. A lot of skeptics would say it's just coincidental, but still there are a lot of cases of that kind of thing where really sending metta does have like a noticeable effect. But beaming metta is, it's largely just an artifact of perception. It's kind of imagination in a way. But still, if you're sending metta to some particular being and they can catch it, it can have an effect. But I'm really not an authority on loving kindness meditation. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, Trizaskas is ask the question, and we got to make sure that they didn't ask questions. You guys got to self-police yourself. Where if you've already asked 3 questions or have already asked questions in comments under YouTube videos or on the Discord server or whatever, then keep that in mind, because still 4 questions is transgressive. You'll wind up on a list, and it could be very unpleasant for somebody. Okay, so Trizaskas has asked a question here. When you were meditating, did you ever feel as if sensation of anger and similar emotions were kind of heavy? I mean, almost physical weight. Well, as a general rule, if I was meditating, I wouldn't feel anger very much, except maybe like you're sitting there like in a cave meditating, and then a mosquito starts whining around your head, and then it like lands like on your temple and bites, but it doesn't find a vein that suits it. It's like a fussy mosquito. So then it starts whining around a little more and then lands on your shoulder and starts biting you there. But again, it just doesn't find a blood vessel that suits it. So then it like flies up and whines around and then starts biting you like on the knuckle or something. And yeah, I could feel like irritation, maybe a certain amount of intense hatred for that mosquito. Yes, I mean, it's definitely, you feel something. I mean, I don't know if I've ever made a conscious connection between anger and like actual weight. But yeah, I mean, it's like something there that is, in a way, it's kind of weighing you down. It's kind of obscuring your clarity, that kind of thing. So I'm going to make sure I'm seeing the question here. I'm going to be doing more squinting and like showing my nostrils and stuff in this one, because I can expand the type on the main list. So it's 42 point or whatever. But on the YouTube chat thing, it's pretty small. Sensation of anger and similar emotions were kind of heavy, mean almost physical weight. Well, it's more a matter of, you're in a state of clarity, just sort of equanimity, and then you start feeling some emotional feeling, anger, irritation, lust, whatever it is. And it's like something wasn't there and then something is there. And it's obviously has a kind of psychic mass to it. So, I mean, you could sort of, to some people especially, it can feel like a certain heaviness or weight. It's like your mind is all light, and then it just kind of gets burdened by certain mental states. Yeah, I mean, I can understand how people could feel it that way. I mean, I've never really made a connection. Wow, this irritation feels heavy. But I mean, you can interpret it that way. And I don't know if this is going to be lagging or not. I don't know what the quality of this video is going to be. Hopefully the sound issues at least have been fixed. Let's see here. Keep scrolling a little bit here. Chester Runaway. Have you heard of people meeting and talking to individuals that are later revealed to have been already dead by that point? A full spirit materialization, if you will. I haven't run across somebody like that in person, but I have read about that sort of thing in books, like a full body apparition. I read a book about, the after death experience or something like that. And it was like a person sitting on their couch, watching TV, reading a book or whatever. And all of a sudden, some friend of theirs just appears in the doorway. He looks very white and kind of dazed. And I think he might have had blood on his face or something. And he just kind of like stares at them and then just poofs out of existence. And then later, the person finds out that he had died just shortly before that apparition occurred. So yeah, I've heard about that. I've read about it, but let's see. Yeah, I've read about it. Apparently it does happen to some people sometimes, but it hasn't happened to me. I mean, I have seen a few apparitions in my life, but it wasn't anybody that I didn't know was dead. Let's see, how does he do it? Yeah, that they were later revealed to be dead or something. I mean, maybe. I mean, once in Burma, I saw a kind of apparition that at first I thought was a real person until I started thinking about it. And I started thinking, well, maybe there was nobody there. You know, it's like, I've told the story before. I was down at the lower monastery getting a bucket of water. I'm walking back up to my cave with this 5-gallon full bucket of water on my shoulder. And because I was usually going barefoot, I'd have to look down to make sure you're not stepping on a scorpion or something or anything else that's icky. Because when you're barefoot, you gotta be mindful of where you're walking. That's one of the advantages of going barefoot. It improves your mindfulness. So anyways, through my peripheral vision, I can see a young man come out of the forest down the trail or up the trail, along the trail. And he comes out into the clearing, and I could, even though I was seeing him with my peripheral vision, I was looking down when he comes out. I mean, he was a young man wearing a blue shirt. I remember that. And, you know, black hair, like pretty much everyone has in Burma. And as soon as he saw me, he just took off like a streak. He just took off running across my field of view, you know, maybe 30 feet away at most, and went behind the congregation hall. And I'm thinking, you know, somebody at a monastery sees a monk and they take off running. They're probably a thief or up to no good. You know, they're killing chickens or something. So I looked for him and there was just no sign of him anywhere. So then I'm thinking, well, were there footprints? Because, I mean, when he took off like a streak, just less than 30 feet away from me, it made no sound whatsoever. There were no thumping of footprint, like footsteps, anything like that. It was just completely silent when he just took off like a streak. And there were no footprints, but it was hard ground. So, I mean, there was that. I mean, theoretically, it could have been a person who just ran very quietly, very fast. But when I told some nice village ladies about what happened, one of them she just had no doubt at all that it was her own uncle who had been ordained at that same monastery as a novice. And he was not a conscientious novice because he was still married. He had his wife living in that congregation hall with him as a novice. And a lot of the people, they didn't like that. You know, you got some novice at a monastery living with his own wife in the congregation hall of the monastery. And he wound up getting poisoned, apparently, and just dropped dead. And so she just thought for sure it must have been him. But so that'd be like, from my own personal experience, about as close to that sort of thing as I've ever experienced. But I have read of cases where, you know, they see somebody, they think it's their friend, and then it wasn't until later they realize that their friend was already dead at the time that they saw him. So it can happen. I'm relatively extremely open-minded with regard to acknowledging the possibility of things, because damn near anything is possible. So, Cleefy did not know the Q&A is live today. Well, I did give fair warning in 199. Oh, which reminds me, 200 is not prime at all. 200, that's 2 times 100, so that's 2. And then another 2 when you get 50. Another 2, you get 25, and then it's 5 times 5. So it's 2 times 2 times 2 times 5 times 5, I guess. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's see here. Is this live or Memorex? God, that's an old one. They don't have Memorex anymore. God, let's see. I gotta scroll down here. Let's see. Maitreya Buddha, who goes by the pseudonym of XX Killa BGXX, being a sociopath is contrary to metta. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, even like if you read Dostoevsky's The Idiot, which is at one level, it's a parable of Christ and the devil struggling for the soul of the sinner. And you've got Rogozhin, who represents the devil. When he loves Nastasia, I mean, he's just obsessed with owning her, like possessing her and controlling her. That is like sort of the the spiritually dead or spiritually comatose approach to love of another person is just like ownership and control. You know, it's not really caring about how they feel, anything like that. So yeah, but then I shouldn't be too much just making comments on the chat here. Let's see. We got somebody who I know who they are, but they don't go by that name, but I don't know if they want me to call them by any other name. So they're just going to remain anonymous here. And they're saying, what would you say is your most dominant chakra and also your favorite? Well, Ram, I'm not into yoga very much. I'm not really much into New Age. So I'm really not an authority on chakras. But Ram Dass used to say that most normies, you know, most worldlings only have 3 chakras open. That's the root chakra at the base of the penis, I guess, is, the base of the tailbone, let's say, is just survival. That's root chakra. Second chakra is sex. Second chakra is like a little higher up than the root of your tailbone. And then third chakra, which is around your solar plexus, your dantian, if you're into Chinese medicine, that's like worldly power and status and so forth. I assume intellect would be in there. And then those are like the 3 that most people are mainly operating on. Fourth chakra is the heart chakra. That's like compassion, where you start actually acknowledging that there's another you, behind that person's eyes. You know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? It's like, it's just kind of more, you're starting to get an insight into the idea that everyone is a kind of me. In a way, it's like everyone's sharing the same consciousness. They just have different egos, like claiming a certain territory as their own, that kind of thing. So my most dominant chakra, gosh, when I was younger, it might have been my second one, but whatever is like the intellect chakra, probably number 3. Yeah, I mean, you get into like more like knowledge-oriented chakras, as you get up into the head region. But just being realistic and maybe kind of humble or something, and just assuming that my main chakras at which I've been operating are kind of the lower ones, like most people in this world, then maybe third chakra, but it would be like the intellect kind of third chakra and not social status, that kind of thing. Because I was never really into social status. I think I'm abnormally callous to the opinions of others, more so than most people. I mean, I'm not just completely oblivious to the opinions of others, especially the opinions of my sweetie that I have to take seriously because we're like an us now. But just a stranger's opinion of me. I mean, I can go into public just looking like a mess because I don't really give a damn what people think about it. My sweetie, on the other hand, she's got to put on her makeup and stuff before she considers herself presentable to go out and just meet total strangers, like at the grocery store or something. So my most dominant chakra, probably like more of the intellectual. So I would guess it'd be like the intellectual aspect of third chakra. When I was younger, there would be definite times, even a few times nowadays in my old age, when second chakra, the sexual chakra kind of is in the ascendant. But my favorite chakra, I guess that would have to be the 1,000-petaled lotus on the crown of the head, which opens when you become fully enlightened. I mean, that'd have to be my favorite just for the sake of principle. Okay, then. So, let's see here. Proto-pseudo monk advises me to grow psilocybin mushrooms at home. Yeah, I think it's legal. At least the spores and that kind of thing is legal in the United States. It's been legal since like the 1970s. I remember when I was a teenager, where you could, in High Times magazine, you could find kits where you could buy the spores and brown rice because they don't want to be sending cow poop in the mail, that kind of thing. And you can grow psilocybin mushrooms in sterilized brown rice in a gallon jar or something. So yeah, I mean, that's an option, I suppose. Let's see, Robert, I know you are a big St. John of the Cross fan. What writing by him would you recommend? The Ascent of Mount Carmel is probably his main, like, mystical text. I mean, he's got sayings of light and love, or just, they're like little proverbs for, you know, spiritual advice, that kind of thing. Some of his poetry, like, I can't remember the name of it. It's like stanzas inspired by an experience of high contemplation, which is, I mean, it's a profound poem. One of the most profound poems I've ever read. But you want to know, like, his philosophy regarding how mysticism works and how best to practice, that kind of thing. Just nuts and bolts of his philosophy and his ethics and how to practice correctly. You're probably better off with La Subida del Monte Carmelo, or The Ascent of Mount Carmel, which reminds me, Carmelo. That's a name famous in the news lately. I wonder if they named him that at random, or they really knew that Carmelo was like Spanish for Mount Carmel. I don't know. And it doesn't even matter. So, yeah, The Ascent of Mount Carmel would be it's sort of like Nagarjuna has the Mula Madhyamaka Karika as like his magnum opus, or just kind of like the central work for understanding his philosophy. With St. John of the Cross, I'm pretty sure it would be The Ascent of Mount Carmel. La Subida del Monte Carmelo. So, let's see. Fred retracted a message. Let's see. Master Poe, is this live or Memorex? Yeah, it's got to be live because they don't do Memorex no more. David says, is enlightenment a real thing? What proof have you accumulated that would make you think it is or isn't? Well, enlightenment, full enlightenment, I've expressed a certain amount of skepticism over the course of these videos as to whether full enlightenment even it means anything within the context of samsara. You know, it's sort of like being out of the matrix. Does that have any meaning within the context of the matrix itself? Or there was the Dignaga school, the Yogacara logicians, they were called sometimes. It was a medieval Indian school of Buddhist logic. And their classic example of a problematic premise, something that cannot be proven, is such and such being is fully enlightened. You know, it's a problematic premise, and it's kind of like a paradox or an enigma wrapped in a paradox, if you will. So in Buddhism and other systems, it is treated as a real thing. Even St. John of the Cross had his stage of perfection, which surprised me reading St. John of the Cross for the first time. And there are people much wiser than I am, much more advanced than I am in certain respects, who just, sure, yep, it's real. But you can't really prove it. I mean, you can't really prove anything out there. You know, it's philosophers like David Hume and Spinoza, mainly in the West, have hammered away at the idea that, I mean, a certain amount of skepticism is necessary, because anything outside the contents of your own mind, anything supposedly out there in some external universe, I mean, you cannot be certain. It could be an illusion. You don't know. So, I'm going with the idea that enlightenment, it is about the best goal you could have if you have a goal. And there is some reality to it, even if somehow you're like perpetrating a paradox by becoming enlightened while still apparently moving around and making noise in this like illusory matrix samsara. So, let's see. What proof have you accumulated that would make you think it is or isn't? Well, I mean, like I just said, there is no proof. There never is a proof unless you manage to become fully enlightened. And even then, that's no proof to anybody else. And I mean, it's not even really proof to yourself necessarily, because there are a lot of people out there who think they're enlightened, but really aren't. But I mean, there have been so many beings like Ram Dass, one of my first gurus in this life, despite the fact that he was born and raised Jewish. He was a switch hitter, kind of bisexual. But he was a very, like most good teachers, he was really enthusiastic about what he was teaching, and he very much believed in it. And he had a guru named Karoli Baba up there on the altar, up on top of the bookcase, who, if he was not fully enlightened, he was about as close as a person can get to being fully enlightened. I mean, from my point of view, Neem Karoli Baba was some kind of spiritual Superman. Ram Dass was humble, and he had this embarrassing tendency that I kind of emulated for a long time, especially when I was a monk, of just blurting out the most embarrassing truths about himself. But I'm just kind of wandering all over the place here. So just getting back to David's question, is enlightenment a real thing? Well, I mean, it's kind of like a paradoxical trick question, because enlightenment should not exist in this world. It's like when you become enlightened, you have transcended this world. You have escaped from the matrix. So words apply really only to the matrix, only to samsara. And so you're already dealing with a kind of paradox. But, Buddhism just takes it as a given that there is such a thing as enlightenment, that the founder of the tradition, the Buddha, was enlightened. That's what Buddha means, that there have been many people since the Buddha's time that have been considered to be enlightened, Buddhists and non-Buddhists. St. John of the Cross, completely different tradition, just using different assumptions, comes up to the same kind of conclusion. I mean, it's sort of like convergent evolution of Roman Catholicism and like Eastern, like Indian spirituality. That, I mean, there may have been some kind of indirect, obscure connections between Roman Catholicism and Indian spirituality. But for the most part, St. John of the Cross was probably largely oblivious to what was going on in ancient India. But nevertheless, just through their own experiences, they come to strikingly similar, if not identical, conclusions with regard to enlightenment, how to become enlightened, what it's like, etc. So that's a kind of triangulation that lends credence to a point of view. If you've got somebody else with different assumptions who is coming to the same conclusions, just from like a completely different position. And it's like triangulation, if that makes any sense. So what proof have I accumulated that would make you think it is or isn't? Well, I've read a lot of Buddhist texts and read a lot of spiritual stuff, like the biography of Ramana Maharshi, this kind of stuff, which does strongly suggest that there is something to the idea of enlightenment. And what should I say next? I mean, you could just kind of logically extrapolate that there is at least like the possibility of enlightenment. Not that you can't really prove that anyone really is or is not enlightened. I mean, you can't prove that Eckhart Tolle is or is not enlightened, as far as I know. Maybe if he just goes off the deep end and starts behaving in really outrageously bad ways, that could be considered fairly conclusive that he isn't fully enlightened. But I don't see how you could prove that he is, or Krishnamurti, or Gautama Buddha himself, who lived 25 centuries ago. All we got really with regard to his life is legends, which presumably contain a lot of truth, but also a lot of untruth. So I hope I answered that question more or less. It seems like a reasonable working hypothesis That's about the best I can give you. So, next question is from Avinity. And Avinity says, there she is. Avinity says, in Theravada Buddhism, it is more ethical to sterilize stray animals to reduce future suffering or to have them alone and let nature take its course. Actually, this situation has arisen a number of times when I was a monk in Burma, and sterilizing animals is considered to be a bad thing. There's some story in the commentaries of Sariputta in a previous life, like castrated an ox or something, and it messed up his karma in subsequent lives. So from a Buddhist point of view, just standing back and letting the cats overpopulate is more ethical than having the cats spayed and neutered. So, and from a Western point of view, I mean, there was like a monastery attendant kind of trying to argue with the monks, because we had a lot of cats at this one monastery in California. And I mean, it was getting up to like 50 or 60 cats just all over the grounds. Most of them were like feral, they wouldn't even let you get close to them. And she's trying to get them to do something about this cat population explosion. And the monks, I mean, they're just following Buddhist ethics. It's like, not our problem. It's like, that's on the cats. and like interfering with the sexuality of other beings in that way is just considered to be like unethical from a classical Buddhist point of view, at least classical Theravada Buddhist. Okay. And the comments are going faster than I can answer them. Let's see here. No lag, sound good. That's good. HD, no lag. Dandy. Because I'm lagging. When I'm watching myself, sometimes there's a lag of as much as like 5 seconds. Okay. Fred says he won't ask any more questions or he will be in the shite. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Try and find questions here. Okay, Cherzaskas is, can the way of thinking about oneself presented in the suttas be illustrated using the Monty Python line, "You're all different, I'm not"? I don't understand this question. Maybe I should read it more slowly. Can the way of thinking about oneself presented in the suttas? Oh, okay, I understand that better now. I mean, the way of thinking about oneself presented in the suttas, it depends on the sutta, I guess. But like in the Atthakavagga, you shouldn't be thinking about yourself at all, really. No self-view, no I, me, mine, anything like that. So, could that be illustrated using the Monty Python line, "You're all different, I'm not"? Nope, I don't think so. Because you're not supposed to be thinking about other people either. So it's just visual sensation, seeing, hearing, and the seen, only the seen, and the heard, only the heard. You just kind of deconstruct the sensory data and don't like start populating the mind with all these like constructions. That person, this person, all of it. You just kind of deconstruct everything down to sensory data and just function at that level as much as you can, which, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be getting to the Monty Python level there. So let's just keep going here. Let's see. Cleefy says, some Mahayana Buddhists say that the Heart Sutra appeared in this world because Dharma was starting to become a religion instead of a raft across the other shore. Thoughts? Maybe. I mean, it happens in religious traditions. It happens at a small scale with regard to like a meditation tradition in Burma, that you have like an enlightened or even like an inspired, very wise founder. And then maybe the first generation of his disciples also have got some real attainment. It's relatively rare for them to surpass their teacher, but it can happen sometimes. I think maybe Shui Umin was wiser than his teacher, Mahasi Sayadaw. But then by the time you get to like the third generation, it's definitely in decline, and it's like clinging to sayings of the original founder and not much originality, or if there is originality, it's just veering off into like a totally different tradition, this kind of thing. So that happens on a larger scale with regard to religious systems in general, like Buddhism, where just within a few centuries, Buddhism is just becoming this extremely elaborate scholastic system with Abhidhamma philosophies and just massive commentarial traditions and so forth. And it's just becoming dogmatic, and all this legendary, mythological stuff is getting absorbed into the system, with people just accepting it as just gospel truth. And it does kind of deviate from the original teachings. And then you have like a reform movement. And it could be that like some aspects of Mahayana philosophy, I've said this before, Mahayana Buddhism, some aspects of it were a kind of reform movement. They're trying to get away from all this like Abhidharma scholasticism, this intellectualism superimposed on Dhamma, and get back to just, emptiness and just meditation. Zen was kind of like that also. So, yeah, in a way, you could say that the Heart Sutra appeared in this world because of Dharma was starting to become a religion instead of a raft to cross to the other shore. It wouldn't just be the Heart Sutra. It'd be like the whole Prajna Paramita movement, the Diamond Cutter and many others, where they're just trying, in a way, it was a kind of reform movement where they're trying to get away from all this intellectual scholasticism of what the earlier schools had become, and just get back to something more along the lines of the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata, where you're not philosophizing. You're trying to get away from all that. You're trying to get away from all this intellectualism, and just in the seen, only the seen, and the heard, only the heard. No philosophy, no belief system, anything like that. And that has happened a number of times in the course of the evolution of Buddhism. I've said before that, I've written before also that, the Buddha just led his followers to the edge of a cliff and he just jumped off. And then gradually you have like these intellectual philosopher types justifying and rationalizing why it's good to back away from the edge of that scary cliff edge. And then after that, you had Nagarjuna leading the Buddhists right back to the cliff edge again. And then after Nagarjuna's time, you had, later like Mahayana philosophers philosophizing up a storm and just essentially rationalizing and justifying backing away from the cliff edge again. So it happens, and it's kind of a poetic way of putting it, but I could say that there is an element of truth to that. And I'm just going to scroll down. Somebody's mentioning Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut, no. I had my mind poisoned against Pizza Hut. I'll never forgive Pizza Hut, because there used to be another chain called Pizza Haven. Got a pizza craving? Go to Pizza Haven. Pizza Haven is pizza heaven. And they had better pizza than Pizza Hut. And then they got bought out by Pizza Hut. And all of a sudden the crust is like spongy and greasy, and the sauce is like ketchup. Fuck Pizza Hut. Let's see. Proto-Pseudomonk. Question 2. Why are you so convinced there is such a thing, enlightenment, an elegant paradoxical intellectual theory, direct experience, yours and others, or both? So why am I so convinced there is such a thing, enlightenment, an elegant paradoxical intellectual theory? On this, I'm not 100% sure that I understand this question. Gosh, and I'm just giving you guys fair warning. This could be like a 5-hour long Q&A, because the questions are multiplying faster than I can answer them. So let's see here. Why am I so convinced there is such a thing, enlightenment? Well, I just said above that I'm not completely convinced. I said it is a very convenient working hypothesis, a reasonable working hypothesis, I think is the way I put it. But yeah, it's everything combined. It's like all the data I have taken in over the course of my life has digested into a certain kind of skepticism, but it's like a skepticism over whether enlightenment really means anything in a samsaric context, which is the context we're functioning in right now. But enlightenment itself is just like the absolute, it's like infinite formless consciousness. At least if you could give a name to it, it might be called that. I mean, that's there. And I think that it is possible to transcend the illusion, even if the illusion appears still to be here in a sense. I mean, you can just transcend that because we're not really separate from the absolute anyway. Call it capital G, God. I mean, we are not separate from God. God pervades the entire universe using theistic language. And so it's really not a leap to come to the conclusion that some people can become fully aware of this fact, regardless of whether, they're unable to tell a lie or they have this or that quality or characteristic that's listed in the text as what enlightened beings have to be like. Just to be able to transcend the illusion and just be fully aware of like capital R reality that is underlying it at some level. And I think there's a good chance of that. And just my own experiences, my own reasonings, just what I have encountered, like in spiritual literature and all that, it all goes into the hopper and gets processed into my hypothesis that enlightenment may be paradoxical, but there is some truth to it. Okay. Master Poe, Ramana, my favorite, skipped again. My favorite Hindu. Yeah, he's definitely, you couldn't do better than Ramana Maharshi. Let's see. It's just scrolling down looking for questions. Let's see. I'm glad you're doing a live one. Eventual Muse. A lot of people there are commenting that they do not normally ask questions, at least not under the names that they're leaving comments. How about whenever a prime number episode makes that episode live, count as 3 questions? Yeah, the thing about live streams is, first of all, this is only like the 3rd one I've ever done. And so I pretty much got it down now as to how to actually set it up and do it and be confident that it's actually running. I remember it was like the first time I tried it, I didn't even know that I was live. I apparently was live, and I wasn't getting any indication that I was. There's no green light that lights up or anything. I just went out and was talking to my woman. It's like, I don't know if it's working. Just leaving an empty chair here. But it's gradually, I'm getting it down. So who knows? Maybe I'll do another live stream for 250 or 300 or who knows. I mean, it could just become more of a regular thing. I'm not sure. Okay. Let's see. You'll know just when you know, damn it. And Fred, who is living on the other side of the planet, is saying good night. Okay, Proto-Pseudomonk, formerly known as Cool Whip, I believe, says, in general, how should one read the Pali Canon to help achieve Nibbana without falling into philosophizing, rationalizing, intellectual scholasticism? Reject Abhidhamma, what else? Well, you start with the Atthakavagga, maybe stuff like the Bahia Sutta that are just not intellectual. You stay away from the dry, the Vedala Suttas, like in the Majjhima Nikaya, that are just dry question and answer, philosophizing, intellectual stuff. You just kind of stay away from that. Mainly, if you just want to be practicing correctly, you just read the suttas that tell you how to practice. And that's really all you need. You don't need the philosophizing. You might need a little bit of philosophizing, like you have some experience in your meditation, some kind of insight, and you want to know if that insight is like a valid insight or you're just kidding yourself, that kind of thing. You can get some guidance from the suttas. But, just the Atthakavagga itself is fairly good and not particularly philosophical or intellectual. So, If you want to read the Pali Canon to help achieve Nibbana without falling into philosophizing, I mean, you're going to have to do some weeding out of texts that are presumably later and more intellectual and scholastic and all that. So maybe read G.C. Pandey's Studies in the Origins of Buddhism and like emphasize the texts that he considers to be very old, and that way you can let him do some of the work for you. I mean, that would be one aspect of an approach anyway. Let's see. Berber Meditator. Would Nibbana as Brahman-like reality be eternalist? Well, if you're referring to something as eternal, then you're pretty much dragged it into a samsaric context. And I mean, Nibbana as a kind of Brahman-like ultimate reality, it's like infinite and formless, and so nothing sticks to it. No kind of label sticks to it. I mean, you'd have to say that there's some kind of entity that lasts forever in order to have an eternalism. And it's just devoid of entities. So, I mean, it's sort of like saying, is emptiness eternal? I mean, kind of, but I mean, it's just not within the context of anything that you can stick labels to. It's just off the scale. So, I mean, any ideas you have about ultimate reality are going to be invalid. Nothing sticks to it. Because, I mean, we're dealing within the realm of illusion and trying to apply illusory explanations onto reality, and illusory explanations of non-illusory reality just doesn't work. So let's see here. Please, in the end, turn on that fan in the back. Yeah, it was on because it's sucking the hot air out of this room. This is the only room in the house that has a southern exposure, 2 windows with a southern exposure, and also we've got 4 fish tanks in here that are kind of help raise the temperature and the humidity. So just like a week ago, I had to haul that fan out of the attic and set it up here just to blow cold air. But we do have a ceiling fan. The ceiling fan is working. Here, I'll even turn it up just to satisfy my viewing audience, because I do consider your concerns. So, let's see here. Okay. More live streams will bring in new viewers, something to consider. I'm not even sure how that works. People just randomly clicking on the live stream button and saying, oh, here's somebody I've never heard of before. Let's see how that is. I guess some people do that. Anyways, now I'm going back to the list, which has been neglected sorely. The next question is from Jeffrey. And Jeffrey also mainly watches these videos on BitChute, and so he's not going to benefit from the live stream at all. Poor Jeffrey. I feel for you, Jeffrey. And your question is, could you tell us again the Buddha's view on fortune tellers? Would that pertain to modern astrology? As you know, I think there is no credible evidence to outer space being real. I think the planets are lights projected upon the dome. So I find the basis of astrology lacking. Do you find there are any redeeming qualities to astrology? So this is actually 3 questions. Okay, I got to separate the questions now because I am that way. I'm systematic. Let's see. It's my 3rd chakra getting inflamed. Okay, so Jeffrey's first question, could you tell us again the Buddha's view on fortune tellers? And the Buddha discouraged fortune telling, especially monks should not be fortune tellers. That's called tirachana vijja, or animal knowledge. You know, it's just not really Dhamma or Dharma. You know, it's just some sort of worldly digression. It really doesn't help you to become enlightened. And so fortune telling, which would include not only astrology, but also like palm reading, like consulting spirit mediums. I guess I don't know if that would be fortune telling, but just any kind of prognostication, looking into a crystal ball, or using like one of those pendulum thingies or a Ouija board, anything like that. They hadn't invented Ouija boards yet, probably, but still, anything like that is animal knowledge. Monks shouldn't do it, and it's not particularly dharmic. So even lay people probably would not be encouraged to do that kind of stuff. Although lay people have more options, they can sing and dance if they want to. So lay people, I don't think the text like strictly prohibit referring to fortune tellers, which is good news for the Burmese, because the Burmese are really into fortune tellers. If you ever climb all the way up to the top of Mandalay Hill, it's this hill that's just covered with shrines and little pagodas and Buddha statues and everything. And you get up towards the top, and the fortune tellers are predatory. I mean, you just pretty much have to carry a stick to defend yourselves against all these fortune tellers trying to get you to submit to them telling your fortune. So I answered that question. The Buddha's view on fortune tellers: first of all, monks certainly should not be doing any fortune telling. And although in Burma, there's quite a few monks that will do zatas, which are like astrological readings with regard to your first birthday, the day you were born. And it's usually scratched into like a little palm leaf kind of a thing. And then people put that on their altar for the rest of their life. The zata that this renowned fortune teller or astrologer or monk made on their behalf. Lots of palm reading. Monks do a lot of palm reading. Some monks do, I should say, but it's discouraged in the text, and monks shouldn't do it. So next question from Jeffrey here. What would that pertain to modern astrology? Yeah, I think it would. I mean, certainly modern astrology would be animal knowledge. In fact, in the text, I think it's even in the Atthaka Wagga, it says a monk shouldn't even be worrying about Atharva charms. So that's like the fourth Veda for Hindus, is the Atharva Veda, which is mainly just a collection of magic spells. So you shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff either. Magic, prognostication, like spirit mediumship or channeling, that kind of thing. It's all just incidental. I mean, it's not Dhamma. It doesn't help you to become enlightened, at least according to traditional Pali texts. So we move on to Jeffrey's third part here. As you know, I think there is no credible evidence to outer space being real. I mean, there is such thing as parallax. I mean, you might want to look into parallax. It's like when the Earth is at one end of its orbit, the relationships of the stars is slightly different than when the Earth is at the other end of its orbit, where there's like shifts due to parallax because they're not all at the same distance from the Earth. But we don't need to get into that. Let's see. What is the question here? Do you think there is any redeeming qualities to astrology? To the extent that maybe there is truth to it. I mean, my father used to say that he was very skeptical of astrology until he dated this astrologer who told him a lot of stuff about himself, but also a lot of stuff about his parents, because it would have taken, a person of this character, this kind of birth information, and a person with this kind of birth information to produce him. And then he became somewhat of a believer after that. Although I do think astrology is a kind of gimmick. I wrote an entire essay on this with regard to astrology and tarot cards and Ouija boards and also spiritual teachers, because it seems that, like, tarot cards is a classic example of, there is no machine at the tarot card making company that instills it with prognosticative powers. That you just have these cards, they're chemically, physically hardly any different from regular playing cards. In fact, regular playing cards evolved from tarot cards. And so any prognosticative ability in those cards is coming from the person who is using the cards. It's just a kind of it's just a kind of gimmick for channeling their own innate powers. It's sort of like Mary Baker Eddy said this about spirit mediums also, that, you know, there are spirits in this world, but as a general rule, they got their own lives to live. They don't give a shit about us. So what happens is you've got some bored housewife, for example, who cannot believe that she has this latent subconscious connection with higher truths. And so her subconscious imagination just cooks up some multidimensional being that she then channels through. And that's kind of how tarot cards works. You know, it's just channeling. It's used as a kind of crutch to get your latent psychic abilities up to the surface. And, you know, so spirit mediums, tarot cards, Ouija boards, astrology, like a lot of astrologers, they just kind of go into they get all the information, they lay it out in front of them. I read about one famous astrologer, one relatively successful one. She would just lay everything out, you know, she'd draw up the chart and everything. And then she would just kind of go into like a trance to come up with the information, which makes it more likely that what she's really doing is just channeling, sort of like with tarot cards, that, you know, her own like innate psychic abilities to come up with some amount of valid information. Wow. Jeffrey. Oh no, okay. I thought, man, was he in the chat? He only watches BitChute. Okay. But this is a question I take off of the BitChute comments. Whew. I almost tried to show up Jeffrey as some kind of hypocrite for watching YouTube. So, yeah, I mean, the only redeeming qualities to astrology is it's just another gimmick for bringing latent psychic talents up to the surface for people that just cannot believe that they can come up with the information without using the gimmick as a kind of crutch. And that's about it. But I'm skeptical of astrology because I'm a Leo, and we Leos are naturally skeptical. So I guess let's look at the chat, just see if anyone came up with anything else here. Let's see. Panyo, keep doing live streams. Before you know it, you'll be the rogue ex-monk and a special guest on Nerdrotics Friday Night Tights with a Buddhist right-wing take on soulless Hollywood. Yeah, we could bash away at the new Odyssey with the Black Helen of Troy. That would be fun. Okay, Athena Sigil is turning 60 on Tuesday. Woohoo. Will not really. Damn, well, I don't know what to congratulate on that one because he took it all back at the end. All right. Okay, so no questions. Oh, the Eventual Muse has a Father's Day question. And that reminds me, today, at the time of recording this, it is Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. I hope you enjoy your new tie. Let's see. Or I guess nowadays people don't wear ties, so probably fathers don't get ties on Father's Day anymore. See, have you considered how important your father was in setting your very unusual direction in life? Yeah, that should be fairly obvious. Like anyone who reads my most recent book that's for sale on Amazon, in the URL links below, if I can manage to add them after this live stream. Yeah, like people have asked me about how I became a monk, and the standard explanation usually starts off with, well, I started off having a weird father. So yeah, he was like my first guru, I guess. An Upa guru, not a Sat guru, not like a manifestation of God, but you know, he was one of my first spiritual teachers. He was just an intelligent, eccentric, very open-minded kind of person. He also taught me like how to go camping, that kind of stuff, which helped me as a monk because my father was a minimalist when it came to camping. Even when we were little kids, we often did not have a tent. You know, he'd just bring a tarp just in case it rained. Otherwise, you're sleeping under the open sky, that kind of thing. We didn't get any of that freeze-dried camping stuff. You know, we'd be just eating regular, like instant mashed potatoes and that kind of thing. So let's see here. I guess the question was down under here. Eventual Muse. Yeah. Have I considered how important your father was in setting your very unusual direction? Yeah, many, many times. So let's just move on to the next question on the list here from Siovak and Sipad Zidana. And Siovak and Sipad Zidana says, I came across a tradition from India called the Lingaists. I guess that's how you pronounce it. They are monotheistic worshippers of Shiva as a formless being and reject the caste system, the Vedas, astrology, temples, and other Brahmanic practices. Apparently, there were many non-Vedic or Puranic traditions of Shiva worshippers since it was a non-Vedic god, and they consider those stories in the Puranas as just Vedic corruptions. And this specific sect of Shaivites were founded by a philosopher named Basava in the 12th century in South India. To this day, the community has been trying to be identified as separate from Hinduism within India due to rejecting many of its core teachings, and there is a lot of issues around this with their government rejecting this. Have you heard about this tradition, and what are your thoughts on it? No, I can't recall having heard of the Lingaists before Siovak and Sipad Zidana asked me about it. So there is that. He does say that Shiva was a non-Vedic god, and that's semi-true. I mean, in the Vedas, the god that eventually became known as Shiva was Rudra, who was a storm god. And according to Grok, who I consulted, it was in the Yajurveda, I think. There's a famous hymn to Rudra that calls him by many different names, including Shiva. I do think Shiva is a Sanskrit name, so the name and also at least some of his origination is Vedic, but yet the Lingaists reject the Vedas. And that would, I mean, in my opinion, that would disqualify them from being Hindus. It seems to me that in order to be like a real Hindu, like a descendant of Vedic Brahmanism, still within that same tradition historically, you'd have to accept the authority of the Vedas. And that's why like Buddhism and Jainism are not considered to be real Hinduism, because they do not accept the authority of the 4 Vedas or the 3 Vedas. However many Vedas you want to count, they do not acknowledge their authenticity or their authority. So, according to Grok, I mean, anyone who's familiar with the Indus Valley civilization know that there are seals showing a kind of Shiva-like deity or Shiva-like figure who's sitting cross-legged, often with an erect phallus. He's got animals around him. I think he might have horns sometimes. And it may be that this deity was preserved outside of Vedic tradition for centuries until finally it got resorbed. Certain aspects of this proto-Shiva got incorporated into the Vedic Rudra Shiva. And I mean, that is certainly a possibility. Although, according to Siovak and Sipad Zidana, the Lingaists were founded by someone in the 12th century in South India. So, I mean, that could be a whole different influence of some non-Vedic South Indian deity being incorporated into like quasi-Hinduism, at least. So, there's a certain syncretism. I mean, you start off with Rudra, the storm god, who's mentioned in the Rig Veda. I mean, he was not like a major god in the Rig Veda, but he is mentioned in the Rig Veda. And then gradually he starts becoming more important. And it may be that certain prehistoric Indus Valley elements of a different deity got incorporated into Rudra Shiva, which, I mean, that kind of thing happens a lot in religion. And then, like, over time, you're getting into medieval times that, like, Shaivism was in South India, and then it got modified by the influence of some South Indian non-Vedic deity. That's possible, but I mean, this is really the first I've heard of it. So I'm just sort of hypothesizing off the cuff, if you will. Let's see. Monotheistic worshippers of Shiva. But I mean, if they don't accept the Vedas and they don't consider themselves to be Hindus, I mean, Shiva itself is like a Vedic name, I'm pretty sure. And so, I mean, they're just kind of adopting some Vedic deity as the ultimate god and then just rejecting the system after that. I mean, some Christians are kind of like that. They completely reject Judaism. Some sects of Christianity, I'm pretty sure, are like that, even though they still have latched onto some version, some like evolved, modified version of the Jewish Yahweh. So I would assume that this is kind of a similar case in India. So, yeah, I mean, that's really all my thoughts on it. I really have never heard of it before, so I shouldn't say too much about it. And so I'm just going to move on to Siovakshan Sipad Zirina's second question. He says, in Hinduism, dharma is often used to mean duty, such as Arjuna's dharma in the Mahabharata is his caste duty as a kshatriya. Yeah, the ashrama dharma, I think it's called. Does Buddhism have this kind of usage of Dhamma as well? Because as far as I know, I only remember seeing it means the Buddha's teachings or Dhammas as in phenomena or things. Well, Dhamma has more meanings than that. Like mental state can also be called Dhamma in presumably later texts. Still in the suttas, but I don't think that using Dhamma as mental state goes back to the earliest texts. And like the first verse of the Dhammapada, Mano Pavangama Dhamma, I don't think that Dhamma means mental state there, although that's how the commentary interprets it. It's kind of, I do think that if you read the texts, like especially like the Dhammapada commentary, where it's less like strictly spiritual and getting more into like the social and cultural aspects of India at the time, that you may come across Dhamma meaning like civil law or like the law as enforced by the government. And interestingly, in Burma, in the Burmese language, Teya is the Burmese version of the word Dhamma or Dharma, and it does have the two meanings of Dhamma and also law. Like a Teyathaji is a judge. So in Burma, the same word means law and Dhamma as like, the Buddhist religion. So I assume that they got that from like earlier Pali or Sanskrit tradition. So, and I mean, the Burmese, they were never particularly Hindu, unlike maybe the Thais or the Cambodians or the Vietnamese. So, yeah, I do think there is a good chance. I can't remember of any cases or instances offhand, but I do think that as a kind of like non-religious term in ancient India, Dhamma did mean law. And it just kind of got adopted as a spiritual term. Sort of like arahant. The word arahant in like social settings, non-religious Indian society, an arahant, it was just meant worthy one. And it was like big shots were called araha. Maybe judges even. I don't know. So in the Buddhist text, you're mainly seeing the spiritual applications of words, whereas some of those same words outside of a spiritual context meant something else, like upadana, which is usually translated as clinging. To the normie ancient Indian villager of the Ganges Valley, upadana meant fuel, like firewood. Uptake. So just because you don't see a word used in like a non-Buddhist sense in Buddhist texts doesn't mean that it wasn't used in a non-Buddhist sense. at the same time, or even before the Buddhists adopted it. I mean, Buddhism is relatively notorious for borrowing terms and giving them new Buddhist meanings. So, let's see. What's the actual question? Does Buddhism have this kind of usage of Dhamma as well? Because as far as I know, I only remember seeing it, Buddhist teachings or Dharmas. Okay. So, yeah, Buddhism does have the usage of Dhamma as law, not so much as caste duty, but it can mean law. Duty, I mean, you could interpret it that way sometimes under certain usages. I mean, there's enough overlap or something where you could use it that way. But as a general rule, like your duty, it's kind of your dharma. It's kind of like your philosophy of life, because dharma, like in the Atthakavagga, does not necessarily mean Buddhist dharma. It means any kind of like religious philosophy. Religion and philosophy weren't really separate in those days. So I hope I answered that question well enough, because I'm moving on to Siovaksh and Sipad Zirino's third question before I start looking for questions on the chat again. Siovaksh and Sipad Zirino says, archaeologists have now found Buddhist statues in both ancient Egypt and among the Vikings. So it seems like Christianity and Islam wiped out Buddhism from India, Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, and Europe. Are Abrahamic religions the most evil force this world has ever seen on the overall amount damage done spiritually to humanity? Well, I would guess that they have found Buddha images like in Scandinavia, probably because some Viking raider just picked it up as a souvenir. I doubt that the Vikings had any significant amount of Buddhism practiced. It's just like a lot of people nowadays, they'll have a Buddha statue in their garden or something without being Buddhists. They just think it looks cool or something. So it could be that some Viking raider just raided some Buddhist temple or something, and that was his share of the booty. And so he brought it home and set it up, but he probably didn't know very much about Buddhism, I would guess. With regard to Buddhist statues in ancient Egypt, I would guess that it was mostly Indian immigrants, like merchants, traders, sailors, and so forth, like involved in the trade routes between Roman Egypt and India, mostly sea routes if you're going through Egypt, I would guess. Down the Red Sea. And then, I mean, the Romans did have a kind of proto, Suez Canal. But the Romans, they just dug a canal from the Nile River into the Red Sea. So there were ships going from between India and Egypt. And so you had Indian sailors, Indian merchants, and so forth, maybe some Indian missionaries, Buddhist monks and so forth, coming to Alexandria. But I would guess it's largely the way it works in America now, where you have, Asian Buddhist temples that are mainly for the immigrant community, and there's very little interaction between the Buddhists in these cultural center temples and just the people living in the neighborhood. So I'm skeptical that Buddhism really had much of a foot in the door in ancient and medieval Europe. There's like indirect, like very subtle influences, but I don't think that it was really a significant presence in ancient and medieval Europe or Egypt. So that all leads to the question, are Abrahamic religions the most evil force this world has ever seen on the overall amount damage done spiritually to humanity? Not really. I mean, Abrahamic religions, they do have spiritual, they do have some profound spirituality, especially Christianity. With regard to like the profounder aspects of Judaism, I would assume that's largely esoteric, like Kabbalah stuff that I really don't hear much about. every once in a while you hear about some sage rabbi who is like abnormally wise. And I'm sure that stuff happens probably in Islam also. You're going to have like profoundly wise people that just happen to be born, already wise into an Islamic culture. Islam is their only option with regard to religions, their only realistic one. So they become a wise Muslim. That can happen. But with regard to Christianity, I mean, we've already mentioned St. John of the Cross, who may have been fully enlightened. He may have been an arhat. There's lots of profundity in Christianity. I mean, some of it was pretty much ganked from non-Christian traditions. Like early Christianity is largely, it's heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, apparently Platonism in particular. In fact, one person I know has the theory that the Jews got their idea of monotheism from Plato. So I wouldn't say that Abrahamic religions are the most evil force this world has ever seen on the overall amount of damage done spiritually to. I mean, Marxism, even though it's came onto the scene much later, I mean, Marxism has a much more anti-spiritual effect than, say, Christianity, although Marxism and Christianity are both schismatic sects of Judaism, seems to me. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that Abrahamic religions in general are the most evil force this world has ever seen, because Christianity has introduced a lot of goodness too. It may be that the good aspects and the bad aspects of Christianity have largely balanced out, but still, I don't think that Christianity is predominantly evil. With regard to Judaism and Islam, I don't think that they are as profound with regard to their saints and sages, but that's partly just because I'm largely ignorant of the greatest Jewish and Muslim saints and sages. But, I mean, Islam is a product of this dark age Arabia, and it's still pretty evident that that is still the case. Not that Islam is entirely bad, it's just the founder of Islam, I mean, among other things, he was like a caravan bandit who became a warlord and, did all kinds of atrocities by modern Western ethical standards. Having people beheaded, their wives and children sold into slavery, this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, Islam especially, I would consider to have had a largely deleterious effect on world spirituality. Like Muslims pretty much exterminated the Buddhists in India, for example, just to give one example. That was just a huge genocide that you rarely hear about. I've seen some estimates that they could have killed as many as 30 million people. And they were bragging about it. They thought it was great. Fucking idolaters. So, still, I mean, the most evil force this world has ever seen on the overall amount of damage done spiritually to humanity, I would not say that Abrahamic religions would win that prize. I mean, in modern times, Marxism maybe. I mean, Islam has definitely had some negative effects on the West, which are still happening. If you look at the news in like the UK or France or other European nations lately. But, I mean, what would be the most evil force this world has ever seen on the overall amount of damage done spiritually to humanity? Gosh, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I'd have to think about it, and I'm not going to just sit here like staring off into space for 5 minutes to come up with a good answer. So I have already answered the question by saying that I do not think Abrahamic religions in general are the most evil force this world has ever seen. Christianity especially has a hell of a lot of profundity and wisdom and goodness to it. It's just that to some degree it's hobbled, or it's got the handicap of trying to be as wise and good as possible within this relatively like absurd context of a Jewish rabbi who lived in the early Roman Empire, being the creator of the universe, that kind of stuff. You know, it's starting off with these constraints that really prevent it from becoming as perfect of a spiritual system as, say, Theravada Buddhism. Not that any system is really perfect, but you know, it's less. It falls much shorter of the goal than does Theravada, in my opinion, largely due to these absurd assumptions that are essential to the whole religious point of view that you can't really get rid of easily. Like the Jewish carpenter turned miracle rabbi who is the creator of the universe. Okay, so that's enough of Siovac and Sipat Zidana for a week. No disrespect intended. And let's just look here. Terzaskaz says, second thoughts on becoming a prepper. I'm not really a prepper. I mean, yeah, I don't really consider myself to be a prepper. I do like having more food than necessary in the house, especially stuff that is, you can store it for a long time, like in cans. We really don't have a large supply of water. I mean, that's one of the first things you need if there's an emergency, is you got to have a good supply of drinking water. And I mean, I've considered, you know, if there's like a zombie apocalypse or something and the water pressure fails, we might be having to drink water out of our fish pond. We got about 500 gallons of it in there. So that's okay. But I'm not really a prepper. At least I don't consider myself to be one. My wife occasionally in the past would watch YouTube videos by this guy who really is a prepper. You know, I think his channel is called something like Southern Prepper. I think he lives in South Carolina. And this guy, I mean, there's no way he could stop being a prepper as far as I know, without some kind of crisis just slamming him out of his own personality traits. Because it's like he's walking around in his yard and he's got like these concrete benches. You know, you see benches in like parks and so forth. He's got these concrete benches in his yard, and he's saying, in the event of the shit hitting the fan, you can just tip those benches over and hide behind them and use them as a place of shelter while you're shooting at your enemies. This kind of stuff. I mean, that's the kind of prepper I consider to be a real prepper. I don't even know what I'm doing that is prepper-like, to tell you the truth. So, let's see. Questions. Let's see. Okay. All right. So no more questions there. So I'm just going to continue on the normal list. Oops. Okay. This next question is from RPAD, RPAD, and it's another Shiva question. RPAD, or RPAD, says, why is Shiva often, although not always, depicted sitting in the easy pose rather than full or half lotus? And then he included a picture in which Lord Shiva isn't even sitting in the easy pose. I mean, the easy pose, as I understand it, also sometimes called the Burmese position, is when you're sitting cross-legged. Here, I'm going to make sure that you guys can see this. I had the screen covered with the question list. The easy pose is you're sitting cross-legged with both knees on the floor, and you just have like one lower leg in front of the other one, kind of like this. You don't have big toes sticking up like that because you're not orangutans. But, you know, so the easy pose would be kind of sitting with your legs like this. Whereas the way most people sit cross-legged, in the West especially, and in the picture that RPAD sent me, it's like this, you know, you're sitting cross-legged like this with your knees kind of up in the air like that, which is not really sustainable. You know, it's not a stable sitting position, especially if you're going to be sitting there meditating for an hour, because you're just balancing on your butt. You know, it's your knees aren't stabilizing you. They're up in the air. Maybe that would also be considered an easy pose, but I don't think it's what in yoga would be called the easy pose, because in the easy pose, you still got both knees on on the ground or on the floor. It's just that you've got like one lower leg in front of the other one on the floor, not both knees up in the air like that. But let's get back to the question here. Why is Shiva often shown in like a less than full or half lotus position? And I really don't know. It could be just the painter. It could be just you had some painter who was not familiar with yogic postures who painted or sculpted Shiva in that position, and then it just kind of went mainstream because of his reputation or whatever. And then 100 years later, nobody even knew why they were portraying Shiva sitting in a kind of a sloppy cross-legged position. I mean, he's a god, and according to the Shaivites, he is the supreme deity, so he doesn't have to sit in like any kind of orthodox yogic pose. I mean, it could be that it's just kind of demonstrating that Shiva is kind of like Dionysian. He doesn't have to follow rules if he doesn't want to, that kind of thing. He doesn't need to. I mean, he's already perfect. Following rules isn't going to make him any better. So it could be that. It could just be some, like I already said, just some weird, oversight on the part of some sculptor or painter who had a high reputation, and people just started imitating that without even thinking why. So that's a possibility too. But I'm not 100% sure why some images of Shiva have him sitting in like a not particularly yogic cross-legged position. Maybe if you ask a Hindu, they might be able to answer the question. But yeah, I haven't really thought about it, to tell you the truth. I never really noticed it because it seems to me that most images of Shiva sitting in meditation, he is fairly yogic. He's like the yogic god. He's the Swami of the gods. So anyways, check and see if there's any more questions in the chat here. Let's see. Sometimes it's hard to tell. You got to just look for a question mark. Like this one. Let's see. Srinivasa Danand. Let's see. Srinivasa Danand. Yeah, I don't think Srinivasa Danand has asked a question before. He says, if anything Christian nationalism, more dangerous look at the Trump situation. Aren't Mott of the Abrahamic faiths the ones that are at war and proselytize and call others pagans or non-believers? Well, I mean, the history of the world, it was wars all the time, regardless of Abrahamic religions. So, yeah, it's just that the followers of Abrahamic religions are just continuing with the human tradition of waging wars and being violently aggressive. And I gotta wipe my eyes again. This happens sometimes. It happens quite a lot where my eyes start to burn because apparently eyelid grease is getting into my eye. Okay, so aren't most of the Abrahamic faiths the ones that are at war and proselytize and call others pagans or non-believers? Well, I mean, Christians don't bother to call people pagans and non-believers. I think that's mostly a Muslim thing, is call people infidels or non-believers. See. Yeah, I really don't see Christianity as more violent than, say, communism. I mean, if it's sort of like a castrated, feminized communism, like is more in fashion nowadays, then sure, it's nonviolent, but it's sort of like suicidally nonviolent. It's this kind of feminized, emasculated Marxism or neo-Marxism that isn't so much in vogue, especially among college-educated white women. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have a future, really. It's just setting up the society to be overthrown. But war certainly is no monopoly of Abrahamic religions. Let's see here. Yeah, people are going good night and sleep. Like Cleefy is going to bed, but I think Cleefy is Lithuanian. So that makes sense. Let's see. Question marks. Any more question marks? Let's see whether you see Angel. Okay, that's no question. Question. Okay. Srinivasa Danand is asking a question. If there is anything to Jesus or Buddha or anyone, why does it not liberate you? Those values falsify you and do not apply to your life. Reason? It is interpreted through thought, so useless. I'm not exact. I think he just answered his own question. So I think it might have just been a rhetorical question. I mean, the first word is question, and then he asks a question, and then he just gives his own answer to the question. So I'm not sure if he's expecting a question. This is kind of a difficult situation sometimes, especially with what's his name? Gosh, how can I forget his name? Fred, because I mean he just sometimes will just pepper comments with questions, some of which he apparently isn't even expecting an answer to. So if there's anything to Jesus or Buddha or anyone, why does it not liberate you? Well, because you're still enlightened. Just because they're enlightened, they can't make you be enlightened. That's like a matter of your own wisdom and karma. And just because you come into the presence of a fully enlightened being, I mean, that doesn't mean that they're going to just somehow magically enlighten you. In fact, some people, it's sort of like the Dhammapada verse where, you know, the fool in the presence of a wise person is like a spoon in the soup that doesn't taste the soup at all. So, I mean, there were fools who came into contact with the Buddha himself who just wandered away just thinking, man, he's clueless or whatever. You know, they just don't get it because they've got their own foolishness to contend with. So that's part of it. That's a major part of it. Anyways, let's get back to the standard list here. And this question is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha says, the Pali word for non-self is anatta. The Japanese word for you is anatta. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly with a Japanese accent, but it's A-N-A-T-A. Could it be that anatta is simply a word that for anyone that is not you, and modern Buddhists overcomplicated the term? I understand that Theravada Buddhism did not make it to Japan in history, but I read that Japanese people did travel to Nalanda to study Buddhism before it was destroyed by Muslim invaders. From my understanding, Nalanda was the epicenter for both Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. Also, in the year 736, there was a South Indian Buddhist monk who went by the name of Bodhisena, who traveled to Japan and taught Sanskrit and influenced the creation of the katakana script, which is an exclusive script for foreign loanwords. Okay, so most of that stuff towards the end is not necessarily pertinent to this question, which the main question here is, could it be that anatta, in quotes, is simply a word that for anyone that is not you, and modern Buddhists overcomplicated the term? Well, first of all, the idea that the Japanese word for you is anatta has absolutely nothing at all to do with the Pali language. You know, it's just a total coincidence in all likelihood. I mean, at the time that the word anatta was appearing in Buddhist texts, I mean, even though they may have been purely oral and not written down yet, Japan doesn't even exist yet. The Japanese hadn't even migrated. I don't know. When did the ethnic Japanese migrate into Japan from the mainland? But probably the Japanese language did not yet exist any more than like Old English 1,000 years ago is completely not understandable to modern English speakers. So, I mean, the Japanese word for you being anatta has absolutely nothing to do with the meaning of anatta in Pali. So anatta in Pali, it's just the an, which means not, and atta, which means self, or without a self, not self, no self. And it's fairly clear from the texts Yeah, the meaning is pretty much there is no self. It doesn't mean that anatta originally meant someone that isn't your own self, but could be anybody else. No, I don't think so. So, yeah, I mean, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, which is very ancient, it's talking about anatta, meaning that nobody has a self. It's not just that you're using anatta as a kind of pronoun, meaning not me, it's you because it's not me. Yeah, that seems even more complicated as a way of trying to interpret the term anatta and dragging in modern Japanese to, somehow influence ancient Pali and so forth. Yeah, it's just a coincidence, in my opinion. And no self, anatta literally means no self or not self. And it's just nobody has a self. That's fairly clear, even from the Buddha's, traditionally his second discourse, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, there are so many non-Buddhist related subjects I often wonder, what does pannobhasa think about this? My questions for this week are about such a subject. I recently saw the Michael Jackson biopic movie. It covers his early life to the late 1980s, a few years before the child molestation allegations surfaced. I honestly don't know what to make of Michael Jackson and the child molestation allegations made against him. The guy did have an amusement park built on his property and hosted sleepovers with children. On the other hand, most of his accusers have been discredited, and he was acquitted on all counts in a court of law. So I ask you, was Michael Jackson a child molester or an emotionally stunted eccentric? Aside from whether or not you think he was guilty or innocent, what is your overall opinion of Michael Jackson's music, talent, and cultural impact? Okay, so I guess that's another question, isn't it? There's a whole completely different question mark there. So I got to separate them. All right. So, asking about Michael Jackson. Let's see, the first question. Was Michael Jackson a child molester or an emotionally stunted eccentric? Okay, well, I missed out on most of the whole Michael Jackson thing. I was a monk living in Burma at the time. I remember one time I came back to America briefly to visit my parents, and my father watched CNN all the time. This is back when CNN was still some semblance of actual news and not just leftist propaganda. And so I picked up a little bit on the Michael Jackson child molestation scandal or trial. And one thing that stood out in my memory was that for some reason, there was an interview with Uri Geller, the famous psychic guy, who can bend metal without touching it and all this, who was employed by the CIA for a while. And Uri Geller, or Uri Geller, was saying that he had been continually warning Michael Jackson to just knock it off with the kid stuff, and all he'd get from Michael Jackson was an uncomprehending stare. So, going with that, it seems like Uri Geller kind of picked up on something that was not right with Michael Jackson and his behavior towards kids and was warning him to stop. Unless Uri Geller is just lying. So there is that. And you look at Michael Jackson, just setting aside his musical talent, he was a weird person. First of all, look what he did to himself. He started off as a black guy, and then towards the end, he was sort of like a black, white, male, female, human elf kind of a being. So, he wasn't entirely normal. Obviously, he was an eccentric, regardless of whether he was messing around inappropriately with little kids. So, he was weird. He had pet chimpanzee in this Disneyland kind of place where he lived. He wanted to become a Jehovah's Witness, allegedly, and they wouldn't take him. I mean, so there is that. He was just like this weird, eccentric person, partly because he was emotionally stunted because he didn't get to have a childhood because his father was just working him since he was a toddler practically. You know, he didn't really get to have like a normal childhood. But then again, there's other factors involved. Like, well, I mean, I don't want to get into any kind of human biodiversity stuff any more than necessary. But fame and, you know, belonging to a certain ethnicity, often the fame has like a destructive like effect on that person. Bill Cosby is another example. Bill Cosby is in prison right now, I'm pretty sure. Which kind of reminds me of this discussion I was having with my woman last night. Because if somebody does something wrong, she doesn't like them, doesn't want to have anything to do with them, which is understandable. But to me, I mean, when I was a kid, I had very few records, you know, like 33 1/3, you know, album records. One of the only ones I owned was a Bill Cosby record. And it's like, it's like a comedy routine. He was like a stand-up comic at one time. And I listened to that record 100 times probably. You know, the chicken heart that ate New York City. You know, it's been incorporated into my personality. And it's funny, regardless of Bill Cosby drugging women and doing naughty things to them while they were unconscious, that record is still funny. Or like Woody Allen, you know, despite the fact that at some point he started messing around with his ex-step foster daughter. I mean, Love and Death is still one of my favorite movies. I mean, it's still like an excellent movie. So in my case, I can kind of dissociate like Michael Jackson's music from the possibility that he was a child molester, for example. You know, it's not like I'm going to say, you know, his music sucks because he was a bad person or something along those lines. And my wife, she doesn't really separate that. You know, she sees the whole package, and there's something about that package she doesn't like. She's not going to like the music or the movies or anything like that either. So I just brought that up as an aside because there was this conversation that occurred last night about this very kind of subject. But getting back to Michael Jackson, yeah, I mean, he was weird. I mean, and I really don't know. I have insufficient data to know whether he really was molesting children. I just do not know. But it doesn't really affect my like appreciation or lack of appreciation of his music. When I was young and like Michael Jackson's Thriller came out, you go to any college party, you go to a kegger, they've all got to be playing Thriller. And I was like more of a rock and roller at the time. I had much more appreciation for Led Zeppelin than for Michael Jackson. So, I mean, I was kind of biased against Michael Jackson because he was more pop than rock and roll. But, I mean, every once in a while, I'll be driving somewhere and some Michael Jackson song will come up on the radio. And, I mean, he was a talented musician. Definitely. So I have to acknowledge that he was a talented musician, even though his genre of music wasn't my favorite. Still, I have to acknowledge, you know, he has got really good musicians playing in, you know, supporting the song and, you know, the music writing and that kind of thing. You know, he was very accomplished as a musician. I think Frank Zappa prophesied at one point that Michael Jackson was eventually going to start composing classical music, but he wound up dying of a drug overdose before that ever happened. So, with regard to the question, was Michael Jackson a child molester or an emotionally stunted eccentric? Well, I mean, he could be both. I mean, the emotionally stunted eccentric part is pretty much of a given. That's pretty obvious. I mean, he was just considering all the plastic surgery stuff he had done to himself to make himself look like a kind of androgynous elf. You know, I mean, why? He obviously had some kind of problems. And then, you know, just dying of a drug overdose, even if he did it accidentally. I mean, the fact that he was just rendering himself blotto just with some kind of rich person's drug. I can't remember the name of it. It's not something that is normally found on the street, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, he was weird. He had his issues, definitely, regardless of whether he molested children. And whether he did molest children or not, I just lack the evidence. I have insufficient data to form any kind of intelligent conclusion, to come to a conclusion on the subject. And that's the way it is with all kinds of stuff. I've read somewhere, I think it was a statement by Joseph Goldstein. It could be from somebody else, that was saying that, one of the characteristics of wisdom is being comfortable with ambiguity and like ambivalence. And that's just the world we live in. I mean, if you take David Hume and Spinoza seriously, where you cannot be sure about anything outside of your own mind, then, I mean, you just have to have a certain skepticism and just a certain willingness to be okay with not knowing the answer. And it could be, my understanding of reality is so weird that it could be that there's just various versions of reality, all equally valid or invalid. Some of them have Michael Jackson really being a child molester, and some of them don't. Maybe Charlie Kirk was murdered by different people in various ways in these various versions of reality that are all kind of interconnected. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I probably never will know if Michael Jackson really did molest children. And so I'm just going to, there's the other part of the question here. Aside from whether or not you think he was guilty or innocent, what is your overall opinion of Michael Jackson's music, talent, and cultural impact? And yeah, I've already mentioned that he was talented. He was clearly very talented. And his music is good. I mean, within the limitations of pop music. Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, even though it's not really my style, it's like Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is like an excellent novel, even though I'm just really not into romance fiction. But I have to acknowledge I did read it, and it's just extremely well-written novel. But it's just not my style. So it's not on my list of favorite novels. And it's the same way with Michael Jackson's music. With regard to his cultural impact, it's interesting that I was at work last week, and there was an African American fellow who just brought up in this meeting, he just asked, who do you think was more important culturally and musically, Elvis Presley or Michael Jackson? And I mean, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, Elvis had more of a cult, so that after he died, he's still doing like concerts after his death just by, I don't know, just hanging his jacket on a wire. I think that was just a joke from Saturday Night Live, where it's Elvis's coat doing concerts. It's like all these theories of Elvis was like taken up by aliens and is still alive in orbit around the earth and all this. I mean, I don't think Michael Jackson generated that kind of hysteria. But, I mean, Michael Jackson didn't do a lot of movies like Elvis did. But, I mean, the cultural impact, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it would be some sort of pop cultural impact, I'm sure. But, yeah, I mean, he definitely made an impact, definitely. And people are still willing to listen to his music. It's like nobody watches reruns of The Cosby Show anymore. Nobody shows it anymore because Bill Cosby's reputation was destroyed after, what came to light. Woody Allen, probably a lot fewer people watch Woody Allen movies. But somehow Michael Jackson, mainly partly because he wasn't found guilty, he somehow survived the storm of the scandal, and you can still play Michael Jackson's music on the radio. But you can't play Bill Cosby on TV anymore, especially like old episodes of Sesame Street. Yeah, you're not going to see that anymore. And so I'm just going to look over at the chat, see if any new questions have arisen. Let's see. Oh, okay. Chester Runaway says, what do you think of Virgin Mary apparitions? She seems to be the most active deity in the world. I myself have had an experience despite being non-Christian. So, Virgin Mary apparitions. Well, for starters, a lot of apparitions are like, especially like in medieval Catholic saints, would be like a symptom of hysteria. According to Sigmund Freud, I mean, he's not an infallible oracle by any means, but still, I think he was correct largely with regard to the causes of hysteria as just sort of repressed desires and fears and urges and so forth, that you repress them. You don't act on your urges or your desires, and it doesn't make them go away. It just causes them to get pushed into the subconscious mind, where they build up pressure until they start percolating up to the surface in the form of neurotic symptoms. Like in this case, hysterical visions and hearing voices and so forth, which happen a lot to certain types of medieval Catholic saints. I mean, it could have happened to Paul the Apostle on the road to Damascus when he had that big vision that made him go blind temporarily. So, I mean, a lot of Virgin Mary apparitions are largely like a symptom of very inhibited and neurotic and hysterical Christians, just seeing, visions of the Virgin Mary, visions of Christ, like images of heaven and hell, this kind of stuff. It happened a lot. So I would assume a lot of it comes from that. But then you have what in paganism is called an egregore, which means if you have enough people fervently believing in the existence of a being, that faith or belief will actually cause a kind of quasi-being to take existence. And then it, to some degree, it like has its own agenda, its own urges, its own motivations and so forth. And so it could be that so many people believing in the Virgin Mary, like interceding, that's like one of her main jobs is interceding between God and the average person, that enough people believed in it that she became a kind of egregore. And so, she can appear to people through a kind of quasi-autonomous existence. So that's a possibility too. Plus, of course, everybody's crazy. Everybody who isn't fully enlightened. I wouldn't be too sure that she's the most active deity in the world. I don't think she appears much to like Burmese Buddhist villagers. But those would be my main best guesses. First of all, in many cases, maybe most cases, it's a sign of like hysteria, just through too much repression. Saints are likely to be more hysterical than the average guy who gets to just work out his frustrations in various ways rather than repressing them because he has this overwhelming urge to be saintly. But then the egregore aspect also is a possibility. Okay, so Srinivasa Danand is not asking a question, just making a comment. Much respect to your work, not through listening, not through thinking, not through sacrifice, not through observance, is what I was saying. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. It's all good. Okay. Let's see. So Om is saying, is anyone else noticing a slight audio visual sync issue? Yeah, that's what I was bringing up earlier, and it comes and goes apparently. And I'm not exactly sure what that is, what the reason for it is. Maybe too many open tabs, although I did close a bunch of them. Okay, so let's see here. So we're not entirely live. When there's a lag, I'm not live, but I am alive, and that's the important thing, I suppose. So David says, Nibbana, the act of being completely destroyed or obliterated. Why would this be preferable to rebirth? Well, I mean, it's not really being completely destroyed or obliterated, or what you would say is the only thing that is destroyed or obliterated is delusion. So it's the delusion is blown out. Delusion and craving and suffering and just samsara is blown out, leaving only ultimate reality behind, which, like, from a theistic point of view, is capital G, God. So replacing your own limited life by just merging with infinity, I mean, that's kind of what it's about. And if you rebirth, I mean, if you're like in samsara as an unenlightened being, it's, in a way, it's like eternal damnation, because you're never going to be fully satisfied or happy. But I think the main point of answering your question is that nibbana is the blowing out of delusion and desire and suffering. That's really all that is destroyed. I think it's in Eckhart Tolle's first famous book. He says, nothing that is real dies. You know, it's just the illusion that is subject to death, which is interesting, which is why I repeated it. And I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Cherzaskaziz. And Cherzaskaziz says, is dying instead of your own child, for example, by saving it from a burning building and dying in the fire, bad? Intention was good, so karma has to be good. And this comes from a discussion that was going on the Discord server about people, like the ethics of self-deletion, and then it kind of went off on not exactly a tangent, but the ethics of sacrificing your life for somebody else. And so Cherzaskaziz has asked this question, is dying instead of your own child bad? And I mean, again, this is one of those questions where someone is asking, is action X, you know, what is the moral value of action X? What is the karma? Is it good karma or bad karma of performing physical action X? And as I say over and over and over again, physical actions are ethically neutral. It's the mental states accompanying your action that determine whether what you do is good or bad. So one person dies rescuing their own child from a burning building, and it's good karma. Another person might do it in such a way that there's some more bad karma involved. Although saving the life of a child is always going to have some good karma involved in it, unless it's for some really horrible reason. So, I mean, for some reason, I'm reminded of a Jataka story. I think it might be in a Mahayana version of the Jatakas, where the Bodhisattva in Theravada Buddhism, he sees a female tiger who is starving, and out of compassion for the tiger, he offers his own body. I think he cuts himself to get enough blood going that the tiger will be aroused from its near-death stupor and eat him. So he like sacrifices his own life to save this tigress from starvation. And I mean, that's set up, at least by Mahayana Buddhists, as an act of really great virtue. And that also reminds me of the Sasa Jataka that is in the Theravada tradition, in which the Bodhisattva, the Buddha in a previous existence, was a hare or a rabbit who was going to sacrifice his own life by throwing his body into a fire to cook it in order to offer alms food to a mendicant, like an ascetic Brahmin. So he was rewarded by Sakka, king of gods, for trying to kill himself to feed a mendicant Brahmin. So, I mean, it's not necessarily bad that, I mean, like sacrificing your own life for the benefit of somebody else. I mean, I think that for the most part, it would be a virtuous act, but it would depend largely on your own motives and your own mental states. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Master Poe. And Master Poe, I think some of this is largely rhetorical, that there was a little bit of back and forth between me and Master Poe. He was in one comment under a YouTube video, he says he doesn't believe in karma or karma in any way. And then I said, well, in Buddhism, karma is volition. So if you don't believe in karma, you don't believe in volition. And then I mentioned that he kind of backpedaled a little bit on that. And then he disagreed that he wasn't backpedaling. And then he said he doesn't even believe in volition. So, I mean, from the ultimate point of view, fine. I don't think volition is ultimately real either. But Master Po here says, how can you have mental states and not be a self? In my opinion, we're all conscious beings having a idiosyncratic experience. Pretty simple. If you killed a mosquito or flea or person, and there's only mental states and volition and no God, where does the return karma come from? So that's another question. There's questions here. Numerous question marks, and an Amazon person just dropped something off on our front porch, causing the dogs to begin barking. Okay. So we got to separate out all these question marks, and I think some of them may be rhetorical. Yeah, and there's like 4 question marks. So, all right, first of all, how can you have mental states and not be a self? And I pointed out to him, this is just begging the question. It's like, how can a storm have snowflakes and not be a self? You know, it's just like, it's not the storm that has snowflakes. I mean, you don't, like a snowstorm. How can a snowstorm have these snowflakes and not be a self? I mean, it's a similar kind of question. So, I mean, it's just, you're begging the question by assuming that there has to be some being who owns these mental states. Just the idea that the mental states arise through conditions without having any like moderating self-being moderating them. I mean, it's not even considered to be an option here. So, I mean, how can you have mental states and not be a self? I mean, you can't. The way he framed the question, it's like there's already this you that has to have the mental states, but it's not necessarily true. Like Bertrand Russell says with regard to Rene Descartes in his History of Western Philosophy, I think, maybe not his History of Western Philosophy, but he's critiquing Rene Descartes and his cogito ergo sum, you know, I think, therefore I am. And Bertrand Russell was pointing out that, I mean, he started off on the wrong foot from the very beginning. I mean, it would have been more accurate just to say, there are thoughts. And I should have looked up the quote. I have it written down in my little monk notebook, but I'm not gonna bother you by looking for it right now. Finding the book and then searching through it to find the quote by Bertrand Russell. So, I mean, David Hume also famously, he shot down the idea that just because there are mental states does not mean that there has to be some self that is experiencing the mental states. The mental states are themselves conscious. They contain their own experience. So anyways, Master Po continues, in my opinion, we're all conscious beings having an idiosyncratic experience. Pretty simple. If you killed a mosquito or flea or person, and there's only mental states and volition and no God, where does the return karma come from? And I mean, the return karma, it's just the momentum of your own mental states. It's not like karma disappears and then reappears when it's time to reach fruition. It's always there. It's just part of the momentum that is driving your mind forwards through time. So let's see here. Idiosyncratic experiences. Yeah, that seems to be fairly true, although it's not ultimately real. I mean, we're still dealing with samsara here and not ultimate reality. I don't know if Master Po would put God and his alleged creation on the same level of reality. That's kind of what the Abhidhamma scholars did with Nibbana and Samsara. They just put them all at the same level of reality. Anyways, let's just move on to Master Po's, the third part of his group of questions here. What's its determinant? What or who makes the call? You killed a sentient being, there you too will suffer that. Okay, let's just separate. Let's just deal with that before moving on to the next part. I mean, you yourself, I mean, it's so hard. Oh, he spelled sentient wrong. I got to fix that. I do appreciate it when people use correct spelling and grammar, but it's not necessarily going to happen because in some cases people are just like texting. Like my wife texts me sometimes and it comes out like gibberish. I cannot comprehend. I cannot interpret what she's saying. But that's because it's like speed, you know, it's like, I don't know, autocorrect is changing the words or whatever. So what's its determinant? I don't know what that means, so I'll skip that part. What or who makes the call? You killed a sentient being, there you will suffer that. Yeah, nobody really makes the call other than your samsaric pseudo self to some degree at like a deep subconscious level. But it's like you are creating negativity, which is influencing the world you are generating for yourself. So you are creating a more negative world where more negative stuff is likely to happen. And then he's got, in a near-death experience life review, there's never anyone who mentioned anything about eating animals, hunting, killing mosquitoes. It's always how they were treated or they treated other humans, and be our own judge. Okay, so the assumption here is that if an unenlightened person has a near-death experience, while they're having the experience, they're not unenlightened and delusional anymore. So, I mean, I've read of near-death experience, one near-death experience where a woman goes into the heaven realm and it's like prefab housing with like flower boxes in the front yards and this kind of stuff. And like the Tibetan Book of the Dead points out, when you're having these so presumably near-death experiences, although in the Tibetan Book of the Dead it's just DE, death experiences, you should always be reminding yourself, this is a creation of my imagination. This is not real. So you've got delusional people die, have a near-death experience. That near-death experience is also going to be delusional. It might be a somewhat more subtle level of delusion, but still it's delusional. Well, I'm interested in what happens if the near-death experience causes someone to become enlightened. And the case that I think of is John Wren Lewis. He was like this scientist who was like a materialistic atheist up until he had a near-death experience in Thailand. Somebody poisoned him. They were going to rob him. And he almost died, but then came back. And he's sort of like Eckhart Tolle. He had this experience during the near-death experience that just like jolted him into a higher level of consciousness. And I didn't review before doing this video what kind of near-death experience John Wren Lewis had. But that would be an interesting one because it presumably, allegedly resulted in his enlightenment. And it can happen to some people. At least it resulted in him being at a higher level of consciousness afterwards. But just because something happens in a near-death experience, I mean, it's like the Tibetan Book of the Dead points out, it's just like a creation of your own imagination anyway. It's not ultimately real. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Phil Athees. Okay. All right. Proto-pseudo-monk went to bed, so presumably he's not in the Western Hemisphere either. Anyways, Phil Athees says, when I was listening to my answer last episode, I noticed it sounded like you were underwater. This made me think of a scenario where the Buddha comes back to life, and let's say you are sure it's the Buddha, and he tells you that if you let him shrink you to a reasonable size and that you can get enough oxygen supplies and a wetsuit so that you can live in your aquarium for 1 year, and then you are guaranteed to become fully enlightened, do you do it? And this is like one of the most bizarre thought experiments I've ever come across. Somebody asks me if the Buddha came to you and you could know for sure that it was the Buddha somehow, accomplishing the impossible there. And then he tells you that if he'll shrink you down to the size of an aquarium fish and give you a wetsuit. I mean, why doesn't he just let you breathe water? I don't know. You get a wetsuit, so you're living in an aquarium. Would you allow yourself to be shrink down to, say, 2 inches, 3 inches, live in an aquarium for a year, and then afterwards you'd be guaranteed a full enlightenment? I mean, first of all, I mean, it's like an impossibility because there's no way you could know for sure that it was the Buddha anyway. It's all an illusion anyway. At this level of reality, it's all illusory, even the Buddha standing in front of you. So, I mean, if I were still a monk or if I were single, the answer would be yes without hesitation, just assuming that you can be sure that it really is the Buddha and that for sure after you've been shrunk down to an aquarium inhabitant and live there for a year, after 1 year you become fully enlightened. I mean, that would be practically a no-brainer. I mean, clearly I would have to do it. But I'm married now, so I'd have to like consult with my wife. You know, I do have obligations to her now. I don't know if she'd really want to be feeding me flakes and pellets and that kind of thing for an entire year with me just hanging out in an aquarium. And then after that, I become fully enlightened. I mean, after I became fully enlightened, I'd presumably get to become full size again. So, I mean, she wouldn't really necessarily be losing me as a husband. I think Eckhart Tolle is married. Some of these beings who claim to be fully enlightened nowadays, I mean, they're still, you know, they still have a mate. So, I mean, would she be willing to take care of me in my aquarium for a year and then have me become fully enlightened at the end? I'm not sure. I'd have to consult with her, just assuming that Gautama Buddha ever does appear to me and I can somehow know that it really is him. But, I mean, if I were just on my own, still a monk or whatever, yeah, I would have to do it. Okay, so next question is from Francois. I deliberately mispronounce French names, just for your information. Francois says, I am 47 and started practicing in 2011 by doing several Burmese-style meditation retreats, Goenka, Upandita, and Pa'aut, and practicing these techniques daily in my lay life. Recently, I stayed 5 months in 2 Ajahn Chah's monasteries in Thailand as a Pakao, white robe before novice. It was physically quite demanding with a lot of communal chores, and my expectations in terms of meditation practice were not fulfilled, and I felt I needed to quit and take a step back to reconsider my monastic ambitions. For aspiring monastics, Ajahn Chah's system of training focus on physical chores and interactions with other monastics and not so much on meditation. I have a strong faith in this training since it produced so many great Ajahns, and the Vinaya is followed strictly and common sense is emphasized as the inevitable base to develop in higher dhammas, but I couldn't stop wondering if this training is closer to the Buddha's teaching than the Burmese-style training, which is more focused on formal sitting meditation, but sometimes produce practitioners that might be excellent meditators, but not so much well-rounded in wisdom. Any thoughts on that? In a few years, I might go to Burma to try the Burmese style. So he's pointing out that the Ajahn Chah tradition and most Thai traditions really put more emphasis on like regimented activity rather than actual sitting meditation. And that is one difference between Thai Buddhism and Burmese Buddhism, even though they're both Theravada. Thai Buddhism puts more emphasis on monastic discipline and Dhutanga, optional ascetic practices, where Burmese Buddhism puts more emphasis on scholarship and meditation. And I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to both sides. The Thais, they're less scholarly. They don't meditate as much as a general rule. But when you do have a meditation master arise, and there have been quite a few in Thailand, mainly they teach based on their own experience rather than on what the book says. In Burma, the Seatos are complete dogmatists as a general rule. And if their own personal experiences disagree with the text, they will reject the testimony of their own personal experience in favor of what the book says. And so the Thai Ajahns have the advantage of more experiential wisdom, less dogmatism, but on the other hand, sometimes they'll just botch Buddhist philosophy. They'll get all kinds of stuff wrong. Like even Ajahn Mun in his autobiography, he's talking about long dead Buddhas and long dead Arahants coming to visit him, apparently not knowing or caring that from the point of view of Orthodox Theravada, that just couldn't happen. So, I mean, it seems to me that one thing you could do is just try to adopt the better aspects of both traditions, Burmese and Thai. Follow Vinaya strictly and do some intensive meditation practice. I mean, that would be not even really a compromise. That's just taking the best of both traditions. And I mean, the Ajahn Chah tradition has produced a lot of great Ajahns. It's also produced a lot of dropouts. I mean, I remember back in the 1990s, the Ajahn Chah tradition had this, it was like a pandemic of relatively senior, well-respected, renowned Ajahns, especially Western ones, just dropping out. And so it really reduced the Ajahn Chah tradition's ability to spread, which was, I mean, it was kind of in demand at the time, but there was such a shortage of Ajahns because so many of them were disrobing that it really set back the Western Ajahn Chah tradition for years as a result of that. And I mean, I can't really say, I mean, I know Burmese Buddhism better than I know Thai Buddhism. And I know that there are some very wise meditation masters in the Burmese tradition. I don't know if I would include Pa Aut Seato or even U Pandita among their number. I mean, they'd be kind of, I'd give them sort of a grade of B with regard to that sort of thing. Somebody like Webu Seato or Shui Umin Seato might be like A tier meditation masters. So, what's the actual question? That's what I need to do. I need to find the question mark in this kind of essay here. Any thoughts on that? That's the only question. So, yeah, I mean, you could go to Thailand. It might be easier if the governmental situation there allows it to go to Burma, because in Thailand you are regimented. Everyone has to dress the same, act the same, etc. Much more so than in Burma. So it might be that it is frowned upon for you even to start, deviating from like the regimented procedure for that monastery. I mean, to some degree, once you get five rainy seasons under your belt as a monk, you can just go off alone. Presumably in Thailand it's allowed. In Burma, certainly it's allowed. In Burma, the main problem is just following Vinaya strictly, because it's very hard to find monasteries where Vinaya is followed strictly, except maybe in the Pa Aut tradition. But the Pa Aut tradition is extremely dogmatic with regard to like meditation, like progress in meditation, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I would just, there's nothing preventing you from just adopting the best from both worlds. Just take the strict, like, monastic discipline of the Thai traditions and throw in some, like, a certain amount of learnedness with regard to the texts of the Burmese tradition and intensive meditation practice, especially mindfulness. Mindfulness, I mean, if you're being mindful as you can at all times, that will compensate for a lot of no formal sitting practice. So, yeah, that would be my thoughts on that. Just find a place where you are, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's in Thailand or Burma, so long as you are able to have strict monastic discipline and study the texts that to the degree that's necessary to learn what you need to know, and like intensive meditation. Especially, it's good if you're at a monastery or have a teacher who is emphasizing like constant sati sampajanya, just mindfulness of everyday activities, just maintaining mindfulness as well as you can, because ultimately that's probably more important than sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed. Okay, so any more questions here? Master Poe, let's see. Since you don't give two shits about what people think of you, do you use deodorant before going out? I'm pretty much on the same page too, to a point. I do like being clean. Sometimes I use deodorant, but I mean, mostly when I go out, I'm going to work in like an industrial setting, and usually I don't use deodorant, partly because it's like clean, athletic kind of sweat. I mean, I bathe at least once a day as a general rule. Let's say on average once a day. So, yeah, my sweat is sort of like clean, athletic sweat, not like sour, sick, or nervous kind of sweat. And it's not stink. So, yeah, I mean, that's just a matter of like, I don't know, self-respect, I suppose, more than being worried about other people smelling my stink. I haven't had anybody complain about me stinking. So I do use deodorant sometimes, but not every day. And I'm just going to move on. Oh, let's see. Calabasin? I don't know how to pronounce that name. It says, greetings from Spain. Yes, greetings. It's probably late at night there or something, or extremely early in the morning. Okay, next question. Ooh, we're down to the last questioner. By golly, that happened fast, sort of. PSA says, when you first started these Q&As, did you ever imagine you would make it to 200? I wasn't even thinking about it. Yeah, so I guess I didn't imagine I would make it to 200, but I mean, I didn't think that I wouldn't. I didn't think that I would or wouldn't, really. I was just, let's try doing this and see how it goes. That's pretty much as far as it went. So, yeah, I didn't really imagine I would make it to 200. I didn't consciously think, maybe someday I'll make it to 200 episodes. But it doesn't, like, really have me flabbergasted or gobsmacked or anything that it has happened this way. And I'm just going to move on to PSA's next question. Who would you like to thank for this great accomplishment? Myself, I guess. Thanks, me. Because, I mean, it was mainly my doing. I mean, other people contributed, definitely. Like you viewers. I mean, if I was consistently getting no viewers, I probably would have stopped doing it long before now. But, I mean, I like doing these Q&As. It's a kind of spiritual practice for me to some degree. It's an ability for me to share what I've learned or thought about to some degree. You know, I consider this to be a public service, which is one reason why I don't try to monetize anything or charge money or anything. I mean, maybe eventually I'll allow super chats if I ever figure out, you know, what that implies. But it's really not my purpose doing these videos to become rich and famous. So there's a good chance I'm going to be a blue collar worker for paying the bills up until I finally retire, maybe at the age of 72. And then after I'm 72, if I still have the mental abilities, I might start writing more. Okay, so last question, unless any last moment questions come up in the chat. From PSA, he says, what meditation method would you recommend to a person who comes to you telling you they've never meditated before? Well, it would depend on the person. like for a lot of really worldly minded people who don't know hardly anything about like Eastern spirituality or even Western spirituality, they just want to see what it's like, just out of curiosity. I mean, a simple meditation advice would be sit down in front of a fish tank and just watch the fishes swim around. Or just, if you've got a fireplace, start a fire in your fireplace and just sit there watching the fire. Just gaze into the flames and let your mind just kind of go empty, just paying like attention, rapt attention to the flames. Something like that would be a simple, easy way for a beginner to practice meditation. I mean, even if they don't have a fireplace, you can light a candle, you can light a stick of incense and just watch the smoke rising. Just sit there and watch the smoke rise until the incense is gone. And if you notice that your mind is straying away, just bring it back to that smoke. Something like that would be a relatively simple, elementary way of teaching meditation to somebody without having to get them into anapana. I mean, that would, for someone who's more serious, probably meditation of breathing would be like a good introduction to like traditional Buddhist meditation. So if I was going to teach traditional Buddhist meditation to somebody, then anapana would probably be the way to go. And according to the Visuddhimagga, anapana is one of the best meditation techniques for people who think too much, which is most Westerners. But for someone who really isn't trying to get into Buddhism, but just wants to, know some elementary meditation technique, I might advise them to watch a fish swimming around in its fish tank, or watch a fire, in your fireplace, a campfire, or watch a candle flame, or like incense smoke, that kind of thing. So I guess that's it. Oh, wait, I got Eventual Muse asking a question. Since you are an everyday bather, was it difficult having few bathing opportunities in your cave dwelling days? No, actually, especially when I was in Burma, I really had to bathe like once a day. I mean, I could go 2 days, but I mean, if I'd go 3 days, it wasn't the smell. It's just that I have like an oily skin, a seborrheic skin type. So like my chest, shoulders, neck, face, scalp I've got more like skin oils going on than most people do, I suppose. And if I go more than like 2 days, I start getting dermatitis. It's like, as far as I can understand, it's like your skin oil is sitting there on the surface of your skin, and then gradually bacteria start to feed on it. And it's like the waste, it's like the metabolic waste of the bacteria that is causing a kind of allergic reaction that causes my skin to break out. Because I've noticed like isopropyl alcohol helps to make the rash go away, and also taking antibiotics prevents it from happening. I wouldn't take antibiotics just for that, but at other times when I would be taking antibiotics, any kind of skin rash problem would also clear up. So it seems to be a bacterial thing. Like I remember I tried walking from Rangoon to Wonduin, Burma, which is up in Mandalay Division. So I was going to walk from Rangoon Division to Mandalay Division, which was like 300 or 400 miles, I think. And that was really pushing it, because if you're walking like that, you may not have a convenient place to bathe. But when I was living in caves, I mean, there'd always be a well or a creek or a river somewhere within easy walking distance. I would have to find a place to stay where I would be able to bathe on a daily basis. Sometimes it's necessary to bathe more than once a day, because the furnace of central Burma in hot weather, and the rainy season where it doesn't rain, it's just humid and hot instead of dry and hot. Then, it was just a necessity that I would have to have a source of bathing water, some place to take a bath every day. And as it turns out, my attempted land migration from southern Burma to central Burma didn't work out very far because I made it about 35 miles before I was essentially arrested by the secret police and immigration officials, who then sent me back to Rangoon because they were concerned for my safety, which meant really they were concerned for some weird Westerner wandering around loose in a military dictatorship. And so I guess that's it. It looks like we are done, although it also looks like we are lagged by 5 seconds or so. And so it was very nice hanging out with you guys. If you have any questions you think I can answer, put them in the comments below this video, or if you have access to the Discord server, you can put them there. And check out the links, the URL links below if I can figure out how to put them in there. And like and subscribe if you've not done so already. And be happy. And now I'm going to try and turn this off.